Welcome to the Dynasty Fantasy Football Show. Here's your host, Alex Klausner and Bobby Carney.
Hello and welcome to the Dynasty Fantasy Football Show. I am one of your hosts, Alex Klausner. I am joined today by Bobby Carney and Zack Donovan. Wave hi, Zack. All right, there we go. Now, apologize for not having a Thursday episode this week. We just had this weird confluence of unavailability. Bobby was going to do the show solo, and then he got the Rona, as they say. So now that we are sort of kind of on the upswing from that, we are going to go ahead and lead off with the Thursday game. So that would involve the New York Jets absolutely stomping the New England Patriots 24-3. We got a vintage performance from Aaron Rodgers in this one. He got you 21 fantasy points, and he did that completing 27 of his 35 attempts for 281 yards and 2 touchdowns. Now, we are not necessarily going to make our big talking point today Aaron Rodgers, because if you've been playing Dynasty, you kind of know what Aaron Rodgers is about, and you kind of know where you stand on Aaron Rodgers. So we're going to kind of move on from Aaron, and we're going to start talking about a kind of newcomer to the Dynasty space, and that is running back Braylon Allen. All right, so Braylon Allen has been highlighted by all of us as a guy you want to go out and buy in your Dynasty leagues right now. Now, regardless of whether or not you go out and buy Braylon Allen, here's the question. How startable is Braylon Allen today? And I'm going to start off with Zack on this one, because Zack, you're a guy that really likes to get into formatting and how you play in different formats is going to affect what you do with a given asset. So why don't you dive into Braylon and kind of how in different formats week to week you would be using Braylon Allen if he was one of your running backs on your team?
I think if you're in a start-sit format, you will probably flexing Braylon Allen every week. It depends on your other options, of course. But at this point, he's getting a consistent workload. His efficiency is high. He looks great. Like when he gets the ball, he's getting, I think what you said when we were watching it, he's getting an actual 9 to 10 yards a carry, not just a big run that, improves the average. It's consistently, he touches the ball, runs for 9 or 10 yards, and then they get him out of there.
I mean, personally, when I watch Braylon Allen, one of the things that really jumps out to me is his explosiveness, right? It's like when he goes and gets that ball, he gets to the line almost instantaneously. It's crazy. And then the explosiveness beyond that, you see guys try to tackle him. He's running through them. It's really impressive stuff. You're saying he can be flexed weekly. Here's my question for Bobby. You're a guy who likes to think about trades and value and things like that. So if you are moving for Braylon Allen, what are you starting that offer with? Are you thinking we're now beyond the point where you can offer a second? You have to be offering a first for Braylon?
I still think first is a little bit of an overpay just because of Breece Hall is still there. That's the only thing that still keeps me from throwing a first, because at the end of the day, this guy is still a halfback 2 or a halfback 1A, 1B in a best case scenario. So I wouldn't necessarily throw a first yet, but second plus is definitely there now. You have to do a second plus, maybe like a upgrade somewhere, or a second plus, like, hey, let me fill this extra void you might have. Maybe you do, if a first is involved, maybe it's like a pick swap, like, hey, I'm a 1-3 and we have a 1-6, or you try to do maybe a little bit of a pick swap there. But the price is going up really fast compared to where he was getting undrafted or a third round pick in the rookie drafts.
Absolutely. Now, one thing to say is that Braylon's only getting you like 9 points PPR right now. So even if you're putting him in a flex, you're not necessarily going to be expecting this guy to give you like a high end flex situation. This is a low end flex play, but Braylon Allen is definitely starting to get into the conversation. And if Breece Hall is to suffer an injury, like you said, Breece is still there, then it's like you're talking about a guy who's going to smash for you. He almost reminds me of, God, why am I blanking on this name right now? The running back from Boston College who was playing behind Aaron Jones in Green Bay last year. AJ Dillon, thank you. He reminds me so much of like AJ Dillon, where if anything happens to Aaron Jones, AJ Dillon is suddenly going to become an RB1. He's going to become a very high volume RB1. I do think that is what is going to happen. If there is a Breece Hall injury with Braylon Allen, he's a guy you want on your squad. I definitely think he is still attainable because Breece is there, but now is the time to get in, because if anything happens to Breece, that value is only going to skyrocket, and Braylon Allen is really looking like a guy who could hold a lot of value. Now, another back in this game that I think we all want to talk about, because we all labeled him as like just the absolute dog of the game. And when we say dog, we do not mean the guy who had that dog in him. We mean the guy that screwed you if you had him in that lineup. And that was Patriots running back Ramondre Stevenson, who had a brutal 0.3, no, like fractions here. We're talking fractions of a point. 0.3 points this week on his 6 carries for 23 yards and a fumble. So one thing that I think is important to talk about with Ramondre when we're talking about this is like how much game script really factored in here. But at the same time, like even playing from behind, you almost expect he would kind of maybe get a reception, something, any look from the backfield, but we didn't get anything. And so Ramondre's performance really suffered. I guess the question is, are we expecting that to be more of the trend going forward, or are we going to expect the bell cow to come back in force moving down the line? Bobby, what do you think? Are you thinking Ramondre's a get out now, or are we holding?
I'm not sure, because when you look at the stats from his previous games of 25 carries, 120 yards, 21 carries, 81 yards, and then this awful one, 6 carries for 23 yards, his average is there on all 3 games, 4.8, 3.9, 3.8. Like, his average is there. So it's just the thing is his carries got cut by a quarter. So the question then becomes, is just like you're saying, is this going to be a continuated thing where, well, now the Patriots are going to be playing from behind. They're going to have to throw it more. So that's, if you believe that, you got to get out from Ramondre Stevenson, because the touches aren't going to be there. And that's, in my opinion, when it comes to running back, you need to have someone that's going to have a floor of touches. And if his floor is now going to be 6, and you're going to have these days of single digits and the bad single digits of 0, then you got to get out. But if you're a believer that, oh, this is a one-off, or hey, there's going to be these bad games with him, then you can still hold on. But because the numbers are there that this is just a bad game. But if you're a believer that this is a sign of more things to come, you need to get out.
Well, the reason I would think that the Patriots would be in that position of where they're not going to be giving Ramondre Stevenson the ball is in games where they're not competitive. So the question is whether or not really you view the Patriots as a team that can be more of that scrappy competitive team that we saw weeks 1 and 2, and less of that team that's just looking more like the roster that I think we all thought New England had coming into this season, where it's going to be a struggle. Like, it just depends on who you think they really are. And if just weeks 1 and 2 were an aberration, or if game 3 is the aberration. So that is the thing there. Now, another thing I wanted to ask you guys is we're going to play a little game, okay, with Allen Lazard, which is basically going to be, what are you paying to get him, if anything? So Allen Lazard has been a guy who has come in and he has really kind of shocked people with some of his production and how productive he's been able to be. In fact, you could make an argument that he's been almost as productive, if not more productive, than Jets wide receiver Garrett Wilson, who everybody was expecting was going to be like the guy Rodgers was going to depend on coming into the year. So Allen Lazard gave you 13.8 points in PPR this week. He did that on 3 of 3 for 48, but he got that touchdown. And by the way, that touchdown came on an RPO in the flat where Alan Lazard absolutely destroyed the defender. So it's not like Alan Lazard was just catching some ball in the back of the end zone or Rodgers threw him a dime. It was like Alan Lazard made the touchdown. So I do want to point that out as like there is some skill that this guy has, and it's not just he's a product of Rodgers, right? So the question I have for you guys is, what are you paying? Are you guys buying on Alan Lazard, or are you guys thinking, no, I'm not really going to pay that much. This is guy just a third. Bobby, we'll start with you and then we'll go to Zach.
I've always been a person when it comes to fantasy. I always like kind of finding these undervalued guys that, hey, a guy like Garrett Wilson is going to cost you an arm and a leg, but a person like Alan Lazard that's going to get you similar production is going to be very affordable and very obtainable. So I've always liked grabbing guys like that. So I could see he's still got some youth in him. So maybe a second. I might try to see if I can flip maybe an asset or something like that instead of a pick that has some future stuff connected to it. Because my only worry is Lazard outside of Aaron Rodgers. That's my only worry from a long-term look forward with Alan Lazard is him without Aaron Rodgers hasn't been the prettiest thing.
Let's go over to Zach, who's going to probably break down the case for selling Lazard. Let's have him kind of say why maybe you want to avoid buying Lazard or at least paying too much.
We've seen this from Aaron Rodgers. We go into a season thinking we know who the valuable targets are going to be, and then some old hand comes along. Back in the day, it was James Jones. Now it's Alan Lazard. Aaron Rodgers has his boy. He gets them work, targets him in the end zone. I don't see much happening with it after this year. This feels very not sticky. He is 28 years old. I'm trying to sell him. If I have a member like Bobby who's willing to buy him for a second, I will absolutely sell him for a second. Because the volume is not particularly high. It seems pretty touchdown dependent. It'll be good for this year, but I don't see any future beyond that.
Right on. Now, let me ask you this. Would you buy him? Let's say you could get him for a third.
I'd have to be pretty desperate. He's kind of a guy I would extend with fab dollars for if he's available. I don't know if I'd really extend with assets to trade for him.
Right. So he's more of like a waiver pickup for you. I'm not trading anything. I'm not trading any assets.
Hopefully how I would have played Alan Lazard is I would have spent a bunch of fab on him week 1 when he went 6 of 9 for 89 and 2. Got him and then dumped him after this performance.
One thing you may have noticed is that I kind of went to Bobby a lot in that first game. And the reason being is because the next one's going to be pretty heavy on Zack because it's his team, the New York Giants. They played the Cleveland Browns and they beat them 21-15. And the guy who absolutely showed out, the unanimous game ball goes to Giants wide receiver Malik Neighbors, who smashed 20 points PPR on 8 catches. He had 12 targets. He turned that into 78 yards and 2 touchdowns. Zach, the man has arrived. Tell us about it.
He really has. And it was the best part about watching football is seeing plays like Malik Neighbors made that day. That first touchdown, he high pointed it in the corner of the end zone, doing a 360 and then landing with a toe tap in the edge of the end zone and making the score. It was probably one of the biggest plays of the day. And Giants fans have not had reason to celebrate for quite a while. So it is nice to get this win, especially if you got him on your fantasy team as well. You probably had to draft him high, and you are thanking your lucky stars that he is panning out right away and revitalizing not the New York Giants, but your fantasy team.
Absolutely. Now, because the Giants have been one of those teams that's kind of been on the struggle bus lately, I feel like there are a lot of people that aren't really tuning into the games and watching Daniel Jones. They're more just kind of like, they have this perception of Daniel Jones based off of the highlights and or rather the lowlights that they've seen. So my question is, as a Giants fan who really watches this team on a week-to-week basis, can you tell me whether or not you think Daniel Jones, with Brian Daboll calling the plays, is going to be capable of sustaining this level of play going forward, or is this more of a mirage?
Level of play from a real football perspective, probably not. This is the Browns. They're not exactly the toughest competition we could face. I do think you can rely on Neighbors just with the volume we're going to get him. He will get open. He will be given the targets. He will get a lot of yak. He will score touchdowns. Do I think Daniel Jones is going to keep performing at a level that makes us think, oh, maybe he is the guy? Absolutely not. Which is why Daniel Jones is my sell here. He is performing well for fantasy right now, as a quarterback too, I'd say, in Superflex. If someone needs a quarterback in Superflex, you could show him Daniel Jones's stat line and you might be able to get something for it. You might be able to get a second rounder while Daniel Jones is still relevant. I do not expect him to be relevant after this year for fantasy.
So in Dynasty, for example, like single quarterback, you wouldn't make any sort of move to get Daniel Jones, even though the production has been, pretty good for fantasy? He's just over there like, don't do it, Foles.
So in our league, I probably shouldn't say this, but I will be picking him up as a backup to Josh Allen because I have no QB2. That's probably the only situation where I'm going to do it. Yeah.
Like waiver wire, basically.
The wire.
One thing that I wanted to highlight as well, speaking of like waiver wire guys that, or this guy might be on your wire. And if he's not on the wire, this guy might be a guy that you want to think about maybe shipping a pick to. One thing that we did see happen in this game was Wan'Dale Robinson, the second option in this Giants passing offense, got a lot of targets this week. He got 8 targets. He caught 7 of them for 61 yards. Not the biggest day on earth in terms of like yardage, but in terms of the usage, you got to really like that. And I think that there is a case where Wan'Dale Robinson's usage and kind of his opportunities in this offense, especially if the offenses continue to key in on Neighbors, this may kind of free him up, right? Wan'Dale's got to be, I think, on your radar as a trade target. Now, here's going to be the question. Well, how high is too high? Bobby, you go first. Zach, you go second.
I think it's got to be just a bench swap. I wouldn't necessarily go through a pick because then again, it's another thing of you're mortgaging future for a guy that's probably just a rental. The thing that I do like about Wan'Dale Robinson is with the emergence of Malik Neighbors and now Malik Neighbors now showing up, Malik Neighbors should now be drawing more double coverage and something like that. So this should allow Wan'Dale Robinson to get a little bit more open looks, maybe some like anti-scripting of like, hey, everybody's going to go to Malik Neighbors. We're going to target him this game so we can show we'll go to him, or some defenses will maybe script their defenses to, hey, let Wan'Dale Robinson beat us, not Malik Neighbors. So that's what interests me as a fantasy owner for his prospects. But that I wouldn't go with mortgaging any future on it. I would just sit there and see, hey, is there someone I've got on my bench that works for your team and work with that.
Well, can I interest you in perhaps this wide receiver who I would highlight as my sell, who is Browns wide receiver Amari Cooper, and his 27 fantasy points that he got this week after absolutely sucking the past 2 weeks. He was phenomenal this week. 7 catches of his on 12 targets, 86 yards, 2 touchdowns. So, Bobby, you just want to buy Amari Cooper off of me. He may be 30 years old, but, I think that, you could perhaps give me Wan'Dale and something on top, and we can find a great deal for that.
If I had Wan'Dale, you're only making a decent point because it's like, yes, I see them both as like temporary assets. So it's like, yeah, I'd rather have a big name like Amari Cooper versus Wandale Robinson. So it's a good like discussion to have for like a trading asset. Like it would depend on what the plus is, but yeah, I wouldn't mind having a guy like Amari Cooper on the roster, like because he can make games like this happen.
Right, right. Well, now, Zach, what about Wandale? What are you thinking on him? Are you thinking he's worth the, or would you say that Bobby's view of him as a rental is accurate, or do you think the team is going to keep him in the long term?
I think he's going to stay on the team as far as fantasy production goes. I agree that this could be a short-term thing. We don't know who's going to be quarterbacking for this team next year. And we don't know if my guy Theo Johnson here is going to start taking more work as well. Tight ends do not spin up as fast, but he has earned a starting role. They did scheme up a end zone target for him that he almost hauled in. So I think he's on the verge of garnering some volume here. But I agree with Bobby that Malik Neighbors is going to start being double covered, if not triple covered a lot. And you're going to see some easy reads for Daniel Jones and one-on-one looks with these guys.
One thing for you as a fan of the Giants, how much has Malik Neighbors' debut compared to OBJ's debut?
It's OBJ plus. I mean, it feels he's doing better than OBJ did. He's the he just set records, right? I think he is the first wide receiver in history to get 20 plus receptions, 250 plus yards, and 3 touchdowns in his first 3 games. So right now he's beating Puka, for his games. So yeah, he's even more of a excitement for the fan base than OBJ. This feels like the OBJ that's going to stay.
Well, let's hope so, because if we can get that kind of fantasy production weekly out of him, we welcome it. Now, another guy we've been getting some production out of in this game we also want to highlight is Giants running back Devin Singletary. He got 18 PPR points on 16 carries, 65 yards, and a touchdown. He also could have had another big, I also forgot his receiving numbers that bolstered that. 404 for 43. He got a huge play. He also could have gotten in the end zone, and he slid at the 1-yard line, which had to kill you as the fantasy owner. But for Zach, that was a great decision because it helped the Giants get a dub this week. And
what a team player.
I know. There was the high IQ play, but for fantasy, it was the low IQ play for sure. Now we're going to go ahead and move on to our next game here, which has some pretty interesting and controversial players in it. We had a battle between 2 of the youngest and just kind of like most roller coaster quarterbacks in the league, which is Anthony Richardson for the Colts and Caleb Williams for the Chicago Bears. And the Colts came out on top, 21-16. Both quarterbacks plagued by turnovers. Caleb Williams did have 300 yards passing in this game. He also had over 50 attempts passing in this game. He just was counted on repeatedly by the team to just be the offense, even in this really close game, which I thought was kind of strange. Like, you're not going to let your rookie quarterback lean on any run game. Granted, what run game is there to lean on in Chicago? But still, Caleb's volume was just nasty. And what that produced was my game ball here. Now, each of us had a different game ball player. So we're going to just kind of go through those guys and shout them out a little bit. Mine was Rome Odunze, 23 PPR points on 6 receptions on 11 targets. He also ran 53 routes in this game, 112 yards, 2 touchdowns. He was massive for you. And if you are the Rome Odunze owner, you're pointing to that and going, that's the future right there. And what's cool is this came even in a game where the Bears were not really that strong offensively, right? This is not like some game where they scored 30 points and were running it up and down the field. It was just Rome Odunze was massive. Got to shout him out. Bobby, you had another Bear who was your game ball. Why don't you tell us about tight end Cole Kmet and his impact today?
Yeah, what I really liked about Cole Kmet was, as we keep seeing tight ends underperform we saw one actually overperform. Getting him with that many catches, nearing 100 yards receiving, like that is a performance that you expect from a tier 1 tight end in any format. Just getting something near 100 yards out of a receiving tight end. You can't always guarantee a touchdown, but getting that target share and getting those yards, that's definitely what you're looking for a tight end. So that's definitely who I wanted to shout out on, as we are all struggling right now with a tight end. I am happy in the league that I commish, we actually abolished the tight end formation. This is why we abolished the tight end formation, is you're allowed to play them if you want to play them, but we didn't want to force people to be playing people that should not be starting. So this season has
tight
been
end
the
is
definition
optional.
of that. Yes, tight end is optional.
It's like they going the other way with tight end premium, like buff the scoring or just make them unnecessary, right?
Literally, exactly. Any fans of the Who know that's, Bobo O'Reilly, that line, Teenage Wasteland, right? So like this is TE Wasteland right here. We are living in it. Cole Kmet smashed in the desert. Now, Zach, your game ball went out to Colts running back Jonathan Taylor. Tell us about JT's resurgence and whether or not we can count on that going forward.
Well, I think with the struggles of Anthony Richardson, you are going to see Shane Steichen dial this back a bit and say, all right, we are going to be a run first team with Jonathan Taylor again, and we're going to let Anthony Richardson call his shots and play off of that. They tried to do that this game. It worked for Jonathan Taylor, not so much for Anthony Richardson, but I don't think it's going to change. I think we're going to go back to a JT-led offense, 23 carries, 110 yards, 2 touchdowns, a big 25-yard reception on top of that to buff him. So if you bought low during the Jonathan Taylor injury window that he's had these past couple years, you're feeling good.
All right. Now we're going to play a little game. Okay. This one's going to be fun. Who would you rather have as your QB1 in Dynasty going forward today? Caleb Williams or Anthony Richardson? Bobby, you are the first to go with that question.
Oh, that's tough. I'd have to go Anthony Richardson on upside. I mean, there's some stuff that Anthony Richardson does on the field that I just can't explain, and I've never seen a quarterback do that. It's amazing. I still feel like he's one of the best athletes on the field any given moment. And then it's just the turnovers. I'm just hoping he can solve the turnovers at some point. And that's where I would at least go Anthony Richardson over Caleb Williams. I support the athleticism of Anthony Richardson. He's just got unteachable stuff. And it's hopefully you can teach some of this bad stuff out of him. That's all I would say with leaning Anthony Richardson.
Okay, Zach, what do you think on that one?
I would agree, just because at the end of the day, Anthony Richardson is the guy who's going to be rushing the ball. His 24 rushing yards that he got would be the equivalent of 60 passing yards. That's just the game we play. So his floor, I mean, we're seeing it here, 0 touchdowns, 2 picks, not much rushing. I think they're going to change the formula going forward. I think they're going to let him lean on his legs more. Like I said, I think they're going to play up JT. And even if Caleb is this, next Mahomes type guy as a primary passer, he's going to need touchdowns to make that work. And this offense has to get there. So you just need less from Anthony Richardson for him to work. And I trust Steichen more than I do Eberflus right now.
That was really going to be, I think, the reason I would tend to agree with you guys is coaching stability. Now, I talk about this on the Hot Seat Index show that I do on a weekly basis. And one of the things that I've talked about is Matt Eberflus is firmly on the hot seat this year. And Caleb is very likely to be going into a schematic change next season. And you have no idea what that's going to look like. Whenever a coach changes, it just wreaks havoc on the entire operation. The new coach could see Caleb as something completely different than Matt Eberflus sees him as. We saw that happen with Bryce Young, right? I mean, new coach came in and he said, you know what, forget playing Bryce Young as the future. We're going to play Andy Dalton. We'll talk about that later. Now, one guy I wanted to highlight here, because we're going to get into kind of like our buys and sells. One guy that we've talked about last week on our show was Alec Pierce, right? And in this game, he struggled. Last week, we talked about him as possibly being a guy you want to get out from now because, the usage may change with Josh Downs coming back. And we kind of saw that play out. He got 1 catch on 2 targets. He did get 44 yards because Alec Pierce, as we said, he's like that deep ball, big play guy. But with that boomer bust nature and now possibly being reverted kind of down on that pecking order in the targets, do we even see Alec Pierce as a guy that you can sell because that value that he was building may diminish? Is his valuation basically gone back to he's free, or does he still hold any value?
I still think there's going to be some value there with him just because of what we've seen on tape. And he's still got a lot of youth behind him. So there's still some hopium behind him that he can be something. But yes, you do have to now worry if they're only going to throw the ball 15, 20 times and you're splitting that up against Alec Pierce and Josh Downs and Jonathan Taylor and all that stuff. Well, now you have to sit there and kind of do rough math in your mind of, well, he's only going to get 5 targets. So you have to understand that this is a best ball, like really boomer bust dependent player on your roster.
Absolutely. Okay, now here's another guy that I wanted to bring up because he is possibly a guy that, let's say you are dropping Alec Pierce to the waivers. Here's a guy you might find on the waivers, perhaps. That is Bears running back Roschon Johnson, who got in the mix this week. And his stat line, he got you 10 points. He did that on 8 rushes for 30 yards, but it was the receiving work where he got 4 of 5 for 32 that really helped out his PPR outlook. Now, seeing Roschon get in the mix was a positive sign. Now, I'm going to hand this over to Zack. Because Zack has been pounding the freaking table for Roschon Johnson. Anytime he can possibly sneak Roschon Johnson into a conversation. So I would like him to go ahead and make the case for Roschon Johnson going forward. Give us the hopium, Zack.
All right. Well, I wouldn't say I'm that big on Roschon Johnson, but the case for Roschon, if we want to go all the way back to the beginning, is he was buried behind Bijan Robinson at Texas, and he was actually a very capable back. And the thing that makes you really look at him and get excited is he has a third down skill set, but he has the build of a goal line back. And that is money in PPR fantasy because that means he's going to get the high value touches if the coaches know how to use them. And the reason I have not been out on Roschon this year is because none of the rest of the backfield, no one's doing well, which means a change is coming. And I wasn't very convinced that Roschon Johnson was a healthy scratch because he got injured last year before he could really come on. And I think they were just kind of going, well, we'll bring you on when we need you. Why don't you take a little extra rest? And we saw it, the running game wasn't working, so they brought Roschon in to make a change. He was very efficient. He got only 12 opportunities, but he probably earned more going forward as he's the only one aside from Swift who's looked like they've had any juice. So he's still in a buy low window because he hasn't popped off. But I think if you add a touchdown to this, then he becomes much tougher to get. So if he's still on the wire, grab him. He's an easy stash. If you can get someone to throw him into a trade as a sweetener, counter and have them add Roschon to it, do it. It's free money.
All right. Now, we're going to talk about another game this week where we had a quarterback who, if you were listening to this show and you were rocking with us on day one, you got in on this free money right here. And that is quarterback Sam Darnold, who had, say it with me, people, 4 passing touchdowns He is looking like a possible NFL MVP candidate for the 3-0 Minnesota Vikings, who absolutely destroyed the Houston Texans 34-7. I mean, they wrecked them. Okay, now Sam Darnold, here is the question, all right? Because we saw Sam Darnold go to head with CJ Stroud this week, who, let's be real, CJ Stroud gets a little of our Game of Thrones bell of shame, 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 shame. Because he did not do anything for you. 11 points. This is not what you expected out of like some of the got what we call the dynasty quarterback one, probably, right? Coming into this year. Now, here's the real question. Is Sam Darnold a better weekly starter than CJ Stroud in 2024? Zach, I will let you go first on that one.
Oh,
I
I'm
would
not
really have
ready
to
to
look at
go out on
schedules.
CJ Stroud. Yeah, that'd be that. I mean,
I'd have to
also
schedule
Sam
watch.
Darnold has TJ Hawkinson coming back and Jordan Addison coming back, so it should only get better for him. Yeah, I'm still gonna go with my boy CJ Stroud just because of what he showed he can do last year. But he needs to start doing it, or that answer's got to change. Otherwise, we have to start wondering, did the NFL figure out CJ Stroud?
Right, right. I mean,
Right?
there's definitely a case to be made that, I mean, he is kind of experiencing a little bit of like, I think just a combination of the league kind of getting away from, down or the league being better at defending downfield passing, probably like the play calling being a little more figured out because people have now had a year of tape on the scheme, had a year of tape on CJ, how they're going to attack. It's not a surprise anymore what Bobby Slowick's going to do. So there's definitely a case to be made that yeah, CJ Stroud is kind of in regression mode, and the league hasn't necessarily figured out Kevin O'Connell and Sam Darnold yet. So that may be a train you want to ride. Now, another train from the Minnesota Vikings that you may want to be riding is the guy that Bobby and Zack chose as their game ball recipient this week. That is running back Aaron Jones. So, Bobby, since Zack did the Darnold breakdown, we're going to have you break down Aaron Jones and why you think he is a guy for this Minnesota offense that we need to be paying attention to.
I mean, the number one thing when it comes to me with running backs is I have to see volume. I need to see volume. Touchdowns are great and all. Touchdowns come and go. You need to have carries. You need to have targets. You need to have yards per carry. You need to have that high floor. I want my running backs to give me that minimum 10, 15 points and then let them blow up to 30. I don't need to sit there and like, oh, let me gamble to see if I'm going to get 10, 15 points. So I want that high floor. And, this situation now of Aaron Jones in Minnesota right now is looking very good. He's at a solid passing game with Sam Darnold to keep them balanced. And then when they have leads, they're going to keep riding him. That's going to really help out. So that's where I'm really high on him. It's still, again, he's a little bit of a veteran, so you have to figure out how, if you want to go after him or not. I think a lot of those people have either they had that asset and either sold when he made the move there, or they're holding on to him. But I don't see people, if they bought or sold Aaron Jones right now, I don't think there's going to be a lot of movement going on with him. But it's definitely like a person I would be perfectly fine with on my roster right now.
Now, here's another question. Because while you gave him the game ball, you also listed him as a sell. So is that more like a guy you're thinking, like, while you're saying, okay, yeah, the situation is good, there's a lot of volume, blah, blah, blah. Are you listing him as a sell more due to age? Is that really like why you think like, okay, the volume is big, he's in this great situation, this is the perfect time to go like tantalize a competitor into giving me like a first round pick for him?
Exactly. When I try to sell players, I'm not trying to sell them like all right, the wheels are falling off. Time to sell, because then no one's going to buy. That's where I'm always trying to kind of sell in this, like, hey, if you don't like my offer, I'm perfectly fine keeping him on this team. That's been me and Derrick Henry for the last 3 years. Hey, I've had my price to sell him. I've tried to sell him for 2-3 years. No one wants to pay that price. I'll keep putting him as my RB1 and have him run over you. But until then, like, so that's where I'm going at with trading Aaron Jones, is like, hey, after a good performance like this, you should have the phone line open and say, hey, he's available if you want him.
Yeah, team dependent though, because like, let's say this, and this is where Zack, and kind of talking about your format, talking about your kind of your league setup, and really assessing your team as to whether or not you are in a championship window is going to be so important for making that decision on a productive player like Aaron Jones. It's easy to sit there, right, and say, okay, yeah, we're going to sell, this guy who's struggling. But it's much tougher to kind of figure out, okay, when is the time to get off the gravy train, right? When is that train going to crash? And how do I know when that crash is coming? Now, Zack, you also listed Aaron Jones as a sell. So are you kind of following Bobby's rationale on that, kind of like, he had this big game, I want to get out because he's a veteran? Or are you kind of thinking, well, it's team dependent, whatever?
You'll see this a lot. Yeah, Bobby and I are simpatico on this, where we'll give someone a game ball and then also say, and he's a sell. Like, great performance. This was a great advertisement to pump his value so you can finally dump him. And that's because Aaron Jones is getting up there. He has had his injury struggles. And again, Jordan Addison and TJ Hawkinson are going to be coming back into this offense. They're going to demand their volume. Is Aaron Jones going to be anything past this year? Who knows? Running backs in general have a pretty short shelf life. So getting out when you can and getting first rounders, you pretty much always have to do it. The only time I'm not doing it is if I'm relying on Aaron Jones in my RB2 squad and moving him would take me out of contention. Even then, though, the way I play Dynasty, I don't like to sell out for one ship because it's probably a money league. So if you only win one ship, great, you won the money. You're going to spend all that prize money paying dues the next few years, and you're going to be at zero because you made a move that didn't keep your roster relevant or keep your value intact from year to year. So if I see a guy like Aaron Jones, I don't even know if he has 2 years. It's a flashing red light to sell.
Okay, now here is the guy that I also want to highlight as a sell from this game that I wanted to add in here into the conversation, which is wide receiver Jalen Nailor. Now, Bobby has him listed as a buy. So once I give the case to sell Nailor, I'm going to have Bobby also kind of give us the case to buy him. The case to me to sell Nailor is the fact that while this has been a productive passing offense and we've seen Jalen Nailor be the beneficiary of some of Sam Darnold's targets, he only got 3 of 4 for 31 yards in this game. And his production is largely bolstered by the fact that he was able to find the end zone. He has been able to find the end zone in a couple straight weeks. I'm not debating that he's a good football player when he's on the field. And I definitely think there's a case to be made that this guy has a future in Minnesota. And maybe you're buying him now because you want to stash him away on the roster. I just wouldn't pay too much to get him, because here's the real. Justin Jefferson's there. He's always going to eat targets. That's reality. TJ Hawkinson is going to come back at some point. He's going to demand a target share. Jordan Addison is also coming back. He's going to take Jalen Nailor's job right back. So what you're going to be doing if you buy him is you definitely need to be aware that he's a stash. So, Bobby, why don't you give us the case for Jalen Nailor's future and why you would be paying to maybe stash him and keep him there? What's the thinking there?
No, I've always been a supporter of, going back to a little bit earlier in the podcast, of trying to go after the numbers, not the names. And yes, Justin Jefferson is going to sit there and command all these targets and that stuff. And Jalen Nailor can kind of slide underneath and get some of these touchdowns and have a lot of these hidden yards and hidden points. This is reminding me a lot of Christian Watson last year. Like, very few targets, but he just had that touchdown streak that just would not stop. And it's just like, well, you're not going to start him next week because he's obviously not going to score a touchdown. And then he scores another touchdown. And then you just had to actually just had to start starting him. You just had to, like, all right, I guess we're on this ride now. And you started playing him. So that's a little bit of what I'm saying with him. I think he's an easy stash. Again, I'm not paying too much for him, but it's just, he seems like one of those guys that, hey, his price can't be that high, and if you've got the assets, it might be worth buying.
All right, man. Well, we are going to go ahead after that one and move on to our next game, where the Philadelphia Eagles just edge out the New Orleans Saints 15-12. In this game, we had a key injury. Wide receiver Devontae Smith had to leave the game late. Now, key to note, they are also missing A.J. Brown. So this essentially leaves, guess who? Dallas Goedert to be the top target for this offense. And oh my God, did he smash for you in that TE Wasteland. He got 10 of 11. He got 170 yards. He did not make it into the end zone, unfortunately. Saquon Barkley did a couple of those. He had 17, 147 yards, 2 touchdowns, 4 for 9 yards. At this point, I'm just calling him Shane's Gone Barkley, because Joe Shane is going to get fired for letting him walk out the door in New York. That's for sure. And so coming back to Goddard, though, he absolutely smashed in this game and put his elite ability on display. Like, he can be that tight end one. But one of the things that us Dallas Goedert owners know, Zack, is that Dallas Goedert cannot actually be trusted week to week, and he's probably a better best ball asset. So if you are the Goddard owner, how are you handling this? Are you counting him as a sell? Or are you thinking, no, this is now the time. We got to put him in the lineup. He's establishing himself. This is it, baby.
I would play him until it looks like A.J. Brown is making noise like he's going to come back, and I would sell just before it. You're right. Dallas Goedert has not been trusted. Even he's had this situation before. Even last week, A.J. Brown was out. He didn't really take advantage of it. So even when this happens, it worked out this game, but it's a coin flip whether he's going to be just as relevant as he always is with them in. So I see him as like a high upside tight end 2 that can get you some spike weeks. It's kind of like how I view Cole Kmet right now. So if you can get people to buy him from you, if they think it's for real and it's sticky, and you can get a first from a tight end desperate team, I'm probably not selling him for a second just because tight end is so barren right now that you need all the help you can get, and this was a lot of help. But if I can get a foundational piece for my team going forward in the future, I will make that deal.
Okay, well, you might have found a trade partner in Bobby who listed Dallas Goedert as his buy this week. So, Bobby, tell us what you're giving Zack to get him.
It would depend on the format, and obviously our team makeups and that stuff. I would try to figure out something that it's not just, because obviously I would know if I'm taking Goddard with this tight end wasteland, it's going to be like, all right, you're now leaving this gigantic hole over here. So I would most likely have to either send my starting tight end, or like I'd have to probably maybe take on some extra talent from his team that maybe is not necessarily worth it, but he needs to be able to have the waiver move to go pick up a new tight end. As for a price, I don't know, but that's where I'm having him as a buy. We're starting to get into separation time of, if you wait another 3-4 weeks for your team to, like, hey, we just need to wait a little longer. It's gonna be week 5 and you're gonna be 2-3, and you're gonna be in some leagues out of it. So you got to start making your moves now of what you're gonna do.
Well, here's another debate we're going to have over another move that we have to think about. All right, which is going to be wide receiver Chris Olave, who is listed as me and Bobby's top sell of the week and Zack's top buy of the week. So this is going to be a fun little debate. Now, Bobby and I drafted Chris Olave in the Dynasty League that we manage. And we have kind of talked on our podcast about kind of Derek Carr and Chris Olave and the relationship between Chris Olave's production and winning for the Saints and good production for Derek Carr. So, to recap, we have 2 weeks where Chris Olave is kind of not the top target in this offense. He is this kind of the second fiddle to Rashid Shaheed, who, by the way, this week was terrible. 0 of 5 for 0 yards, 0 touchdowns, and 0 fantasy points for you. So if you started him, God help you. Okay, so Chris Olave, back to him, right? We see like when he has a massive day, the Saints don't necessarily win, and Derek Carr doesn't necessarily look good. Derek Carr was not good today, despite being like the quarterback, one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL over like the past couple weeks, right? And so my question is moving forward, do we see Derek Carr kind of go away from Chris Olave because that's what's good for him to do, and his job is on the line, and the Saints must make the playoffs or everyone's fired? Or do we kind of see them try to continue to appease Chris Olave at the expense of winning? I will lead with Bobby because you are the resident Saints haterade drinker, and this is your opportunity to go off, my man.
Well, resident Saints hater, but it's also I have Chris Olave in the team we co-manage, and I have him in the other league that I commish. So as it pertains to Chris Olave, he's getting to that point, I feel like, on our roster and in my roster, as one of those guys you need to start thinking about moving to make room for other people. Like, for my roster in DCL, he's one of my starters, but sooner or later, I need to make room for Romeo Odunze. I have to make room for him. I spent a third overall on him. Where does he go if I still play Olave, AJ Brown, and Puka Nacua? Where does he go? Now, granted, right now I have Puka hurt, but that's where I'm starting to... He's becoming that person of like, I could live without this guy. And that's where that's where I'm considering him when you're starting to look at trading him away and making those trade partners. So... yes, in La Liga, I guess maybe we can have a little bit of those discussions with other people about trading him. I know I've been very wanting to hold on to him because of our targets. I've always loved his targets. He's always been a wide receiver 1. I still think he's a wide receiver 1 in New Orleans. I think a lot of Shaheed stuff is very Tyreek Hill-like. He's just catching deep bombs. That's all it is. Chris Olave is more of like a Chris Godwin. He's getting those kind of like tougher yards, those 15 yards, and he's going to get those consistently. I think that is a little bit why Shaheed had nothing this week. They just, all right, you're not going to catch a deep ball on us, and we're going to let Chris Olave do all this junk yardage underneath. So, and we don't care about that. We care about the stats. We don't care about the wins. So I know it's your point of, hey, when he's getting yards, they're losing. When he's not getting yards, they're winning. But at the end of the day, if they've now broken the code on Shaheed and he's not going to be making these big plays anymore, then it's going to go back to Olave.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, like, you almost like made out the case for buying Chris Olave, which was going to be Zach's point.
Well, that's a good salesman.
Piggyback off of the amazing case Bobby just made for acquiring Chris Olave. And why you would do that.
And it's funny because I was going to start by like, yeah, I agree with what Bobby said. Like, there's reason to say that Olave is a guy you can live without. And my note here, I have him as a top buy. I saw you guys have him as a top sell. I'm like, oh, people are kind of ready to move on from Olave. Technically, so did I. In the offseason, I sold him in one league and bought him in another. The reason I sold him was because I needed to fix my quarterback situation in Superflex, and I was like, you know what? I'm fine giving up my wide receiver one, Chris Olave, to fix my quarterback situation because his name value has been outpacing his production for ever. So, that said, I completely agree with Bobby. The first 2 weeks were teams not respecting the Saints, teams not respecting Rashid Shaheed. You're not going to hit that on us. And then they started hitting, and they're like, okay, we got to respect Shaheed. And now Olave has all this room to work, and I think it's going to be the way it goes moving forward.
Okay, sounds good. All right, we are now going to move on to our next game, guys. That is where the Pittsburgh Steelers defeat the Los Angeles Chargers 20-16. We also had an injury to Justin Herbert in this game. That is something that Dynasty owners are going to want to watch out for because that is going to obviously have a huge effect on how the Los Angeles Chargers are operating. Now, one of the guys that we have to shout out in this game was Steelers wide receiver Calvin Austin, who came out of nowhere to get 19 points, 4 of 5, 95 yards, a touchdown. Calvin Austin had a huge day catching balls from quarterback Justin Fields, who Zack wanted to give the game ball to. He got 19 points, 25 of 32. He had 245 yards, a touchdown, an interception, but he also added a rushing touchdown on top of that to help bolster his fantasy output. We actually had some weaker games from Chargers running back J.K. Dobbins, who did get a lot of rushes in this one. He got 15, but he only converted that into 44 yards. He got 3 receptions on top of that for 10. So we also had a pretty shameful day from Jaylen Warren, whose whole 1 PPR point that you got was not really helping your fantasy team this week. So we're going to go through some of these assets here. One of the guys that really stands out, though, to me, past all of those guys, is running back Najee Harris, who we had kind of a disagreement on whether or not this guy was going to be a buy or a sell. So we're going to kind of, again, make this case. Now, here's the thing, all right? Bobby and I have been having this disagreement on our fantasy team for like 3 years. Bobby is the keep Najee Harris guy, and I am the sell Najee Harris for whatever the heck we can get guy. And we just cannot come to a consensus no matter how many times I try to bring Najee Harris offers to Bobby, being like, please let me get this man's off our team. So I'm calling Najee Harris a sell. And the reason I am doing it is because his 18 carries for 70 yards, okay? He's getting all the carries. I completely agree. He gets you 18. He's there. He gets you 5 targets in the pass game, right? For 16 yards. Here's the thing. That's 86 yards. There's no touchdowns. All he does is touch the football. He doesn't do anything with the football. He just touches it a lot. Okay? And that really doesn't help you for fantasy. At some point, you actually have to do something with the football. And I don't think Najee Harris is really capable of doing that. He hasn't done it in 3 weeks. So, Bobby, tell me, why do you want to buy or hold Najee Harris in your league?
Okay, so before I go on to why I'm still okay with buying Najee Harris, do you want to know why we're still keeping him on our team, Alex? Do you know the rest of our depth chart at running back on that team?
I know why we're keeping Najee Harris right now.
Our running back room behind Najee Harris is Zack Moss, Tyler Algier, and Madison. That's it.
Oh, I know why we have him right now. I'm just saying.
So that's why we're not selling him. That's why we're not selling him, because we cannot play anybody else behind him.
Okay, but why do you have him listed as a buy? That's my question.
Why I have him listed as a buy is because there's people like you that are sick of him. And I'm sitting there going, hey, listen, I'm okay with 18 carries for 70 yards. Okay, it's 13 points. It's not 20. It's not 30. But you know what? For so many formats, that's enough. That's all I need from some of my positions. If I can get some guys that can just give me 10 to 15 points. Let my other guys take over. Let my Tyreek Hills take over. Let my Patrick Mahomes take over. Let Sam Darnold take over, I guess now. So let those guys take over. And then just let Najee Harris give me my 15 because that's all I need from him. So that's why I'm fine with him, because there's going to be other people that are like, please get him off my team, and I will gladly take 15 points because I know what else is out there at running back if you just move on a guy like that.
All right. Now, Zach, we're going to bring you in as the independent arbiter on this debate. Where do you stand on Najee Harris, and what are you doing with him if you are the Najee Harris owner? Are you holding, or are you just trying to sell like me?
I sold him before this year. In the offseason, I packaged him and Metcalf for 104, which became Malik Neighbors. So I'm feeling good about that. Najee Harris selling and buying right now. If you're in your guys' situation where you have no one behind him, it's tough to sell. I might still do it and rough it for a bit until maybe someone else comes online. I think Najee's clock is ticking down. He's been the same guy, even in college, he was the same guy where he's a volume play, but he doesn't have the efficiency. So I usually start Najee when I think the Steelers are favored and they're going to be able to just dump the rock off to him. If they're going to have a competitive game, I would typically start Warren over him because I would have the Warren cuff. Now, I'm not so sure. I'm also in general really tentative about this Steelers offense because it hasn't had much pressure put on it. The defense has made the job really easy on Justin Fields and the running game. I think if they play someone like the Chiefs, they have two divisional matchups against the Bengals every year and the Ravens. If we start getting to those games, will Justin Fields keep Russ off the bench? And if he doesn't, will this whole offense be turned on its head a bit? So I'm down to sell and just get out, because if you sell and you get value, it's not your problem what happens there anymore. So if there's uncertainty, be a broker, sell the stock and take the cold hard cash.
All right. Now, here's another one that we have a little bit of kind of a fun debate around, because J.K. Dobbins listed as Bobby's sell, and J.K. Dobbins would probably be a guy that I would probably be buying. I know he had like a Najee Harris week where he got a large amount of volume, but he didn't really do much with it. But that Pittsburgh matchup is tough. And unlike Najee, we've seen that when J.K. normally gets that kind of volume, we've seen him be a just absolute stud. Now, is that the reason that you're kind of making that case of like, okay, we've kind of seen a floor here, so maybe I'm trying to move on? Is that kind of what I'm seeing?
No, yes, that's a little bit of kind of what I'm saying is we now have enough of a sample size of J.K. Dobbins now. You don't have to sit there and sell, oh, it was one game, and see all these other games from the past. You now have at least 3 games now. And you've got, like, you can use this game as this is the floor. This is about as bad as it can get. They're not really going to anybody else. So you can really start selling high on him, in my opinion. The question is then still going to be, how many people are going to be worried it's still week 3, it's still week 4, the ACL's coming? That's what you have to worry is, are you still going to have people that are going to be nerfing your price because they're worried about the injury that is going to come? So that's
JK, I'm injured, right? I mean,
JK, I'm injured. Yeah. So that's my thing is I'm listening. I would be listening to offers, but it has to be something where it's like, you can't refuse this. You can't.
Okay. Now, speaking of buys, this is the last one we're going to get into on this game. Steelers wide receiver Calvin Austin. Are you buying on Calvin Austin? Anyone? Raise your hand. No, we all are just thinking that's a fluke.
You can have some fab. I'll spend some fab bucks on him, but I don't believe it. Van Jefferson is hurt. Roman Wilson is hurt. We don't know who the quarterback's going to be in 3 weeks.
I think the thing for Calvin Austin for me is that, yeah, we've kind of seen a little hype around Calvin Austin, like in the offseason. It'll be like, oh, watch out for the Calvin Austin. He could be this big weapon. And we've seen that for a couple of years now. And while Pittsburgh has been looking for offense, we have not really seen this guy factor in. I tend to think fairly low of players that kind of have the hype and even some of the opportunity to kind of get in there and make an impact and then don't. So I'm not even necessarily sure I want to spend the roster spot on Calvin Austin, to be honest with you. Okay, now moving on, we're going to go to, oh man. Well, we're going to get Bobby on the line because we got to talk about his Tampa Bay Buccaneers getting whooped by Sean Payton's Denver Broncos 26-7. They got like trounced. What happened, man? I thought Baker was the dude.
Baker's still good. So a lot of this game is what I thought the Detroit game was going to be. I really thought, because with our secondary depleted, we had some injuries on the front seven, like, oh man, Detroit's just going to have their way throwing the ball on us. And Detroit, they had their moments, but like they still didn't. And then we didn't have Luke Gedeke, so then Baker was on his back all day, but we managed to pull it out. So I was thinking like, okay, well, if we managed to pull it out against Detroit, we should be able to manage to pull it out against Denver. And everything I thought that was going to happen in the Lions game happened in this game. So a lot of this didn't surprise me. We couldn't protect Baker because of the same situation. We couldn't cover Denver wide receivers because of the same situation. So, and then Bo Nix running around, well, that's what we saw Jalen Daniels do. So that didn't surprise me. A lot of this game didn't surprise me. The score surprised me. I thought we'd be at least competitive, but a lot of the performances in it didn't surprise me.
Well, one of the things that we saw that kind of happened was kind of an inability to stop Bo Nix on the ground. He got 9 carries, 47 yards, and a touchdown. He also passed pretty well. I would probably attribute that more to you guys having all those secondary injuries and that being a thing. Like, I'm not really buying Bo Nix, being some revitalized passer or anything. But the rushing floor, if you're talking fantasy, that looked pretty nice. You got 9 carries, 47 yards, and a score out of Bo Nix. So he had a respectable day. Now, Zach, is that bringing Bo Nix into the Superflex conversation for you at this point?
If you have Bo Nix on your roster, you probably drafted him with a late first, early second, and you have to ride the wave. He's either in your quarterback 2 slot or he's a depth piece. If he's in my quarterback 2 slot, I'm not excited. I'm not super optimistic that it's gonna grow into something. Sean Payton is looking like someone who was very much reliant on Drew Brees. And I don't buy into the Broncos offense right now. There's changes have to be made.
Right. I was going to ask, is there anyone from the Broncos right now that you are buying on? Is there anyone that you're looking at there going, man, I just got to have Bronco, insert Bronco here on my team? Zach, is there anyone you're going after?
I gotta have would be putting it strongly, but Troy Franklin finally got started. He's got 5 targets from his college quarterback. I think now is probably a good time to get him for free somehow, get him thrown in a trade, spend a little fab, throw a 4th rounder or a 3rd rounder at him, because he was a pretty highly touted prospect relatively.
Coming into the draft, some people
Yeah.
had him as a 1st-round pick.
Yeah,
he was a
amazing
205 for
speed.
me. Yeah.
Yeah, he's got the speed. He's got the presumably the chemistry with Bo Nix from their college days. I think it's there's upside there that the prospect outweighs the price at this point, and that may change if he has a week with a touchdown. So just grab him for cheap right now. It can't hurt.
Okay, now here's a running back we're talking about perhaps grabbing for cheap. All of us kind of agreed that this is somebody that we want to target besides, Troy Franklin, which is Buccaneers running back Bucky Irving. Now, Zack was on this podcast last week talking about this man's, and if you were listening, if you were out there and you were paying attention to what Zack had to say, you might be sitting there going, oh, things are looking kind of good this week, because Bucky Irving got you 11 PPR points. He got 9 rushes for 70 yards, added 3 catches on 3 targets for 14. He's starting to look like a factor in this backfield. And I guess the question is what would someone have to give you to sell Bucky Irving right now? Or are you just saying, nope, this is his time to kind of seize this backfield and I'm sitting on it? Bobby, if you have Bucky Irving, are you getting rid of him? You're the Bucs fan. You're in the know. You tell us how it looks.
I would not be getting rid of him if I had him. If I had him, I'm not taking more than a first, because the issue is it's rookie. It's a combination of rookie, so you know he's going to be there for a decent amount of time. He's looking better than Rachaad White as a rusher. As a rusher, he's looking better than Rachaad White. Rachaad White still trumps him as a pass-catching third down option, but that's where their roles could be flipping, where, hey, Rachaad White was an every down back. Well, he never should have really been an every down back. He should have been just this kind of third down pass catching situation back. Rachaad should still get rushes to keep defenses honest. Same with Bucky, should be getting some catches to keep defenses honest. But Rachaad is definitely much better in the receiving game. Bucky's way better in the rushing game. So, and not to mention, again, Bucky's a rookie. Rachaad is entering his 3rd season. So he most likely next year would be his last year. So if the jury's going to be out on Rachaad, they might let Rachaad walk, and then you could be looking 2 years down the road where he's the workhorse there.
Given his size, though, do you really see him assuming a workhorse role? Because
that's what's always thrown me off with him as like to give him the workhorse load, is because I just see that size and I just go, that can't be it. But right now he's producing in that role, and if he's going to keep producing in that role, you have to charge that price. That's where I'm saying, if I'm a Bucky owner, with knowing that workload that's coming and that youth and that contract situation with Rachaad White, he's not getting moved for less than a first.
You know what I'm saying? I'm saying, hey man, if Achane can do it, he can do it, right? I mean, come on. All right, now Zack, Bucky Irving, are you letting him go at all? And if so, for what would you have to be offered? Like, what would you have to get in order to let go Bucky?
No one would give me what I want. It's diamond hands at this point, because if it's a 2nd rounder, I wanna hold and play and see it play out and see what he can become. It's a 1st rounder, then it's like, okay, like you're basically buying him at his ceiling. Sure. One thing to keep in mind, the rumblings about this upcoming draft class is it's going to be really good for running backs. So I'm not completely opposed to selling Bucky, just definitely not now. Let's wait for him to have a season where he looks like he's going to become the guy, and then start thinking, will he stay the guy? Or are they just going to Michael Carter this guy and draft Breece Hall next year? We got to figure that out.
Man, that probably brings up some trauma for some people,
Yeah, and on the Rachaad White thing, yeah, there was some red flags with him. He was very inefficient. He was a volume play, much like Najee, but he could do the much better things in the receiving game. And the guy who was giving him that volume left town to Carolina, and then the new front office brings this guy in. And one thing to remember about Bucky Irving, he led all of college football in receptions at the running back position. So I'm sitting here thinking this guy's coming in to take the receiving work, and all of a sudden he comes in and he takes over the rushing. I think he's a capable receiver out of the backfield. So Do I think he's going to be a bell cow one day? Not necessarily, but I do think when another back comes in here, it is possible it could be a short yardage grinder, whereas Rashad White gets most of the valuable touches, you know? So I'm liking what I'm seeing. I got to hold and see it play out before I let anyone buy him, even at price, right?
Okay, now we are going to move on to our next game and get into one of our biggest running back buys this week, which is running back Emmanuel Wilson from the Green Bay Packers. The Packers absolutely dusted my other team, the Tennessee Titans, 30-14. And it was a former Titan at quarterback, Malik Willis, who the Titans just decided, yeah, no, we don't even need this guy on our practice squad. We're just gonna let him just go, or we don't need to keep him as a third quarterback option. We're just gonna roll with Will Levis and Mason Rudolph and let Malik Willis walk. Well, Malik Willis walked and he went to Green Bay and he killed you for 13 of 19, 202 yards, a touchdown. Then on top of that, as Malik Willis is wont to do, added 6 rushes for 73 yards and another touchdown to the tune of 25 fantasy points. If you started that guy, nice job. If you also started DeAndre Hopkins in this game, who was another performer, he got 6 of 7, 73 yards, a touchdown, and a game ball from Zack. Malik Willis got the game ball from me and Bobby. But here's the guy who is the true top buy, Emmanuel Wilson. And here's what he did. He got in for 12 rushes, 50 yards. He also added 2 of 2 receiving for 35 and a touchdown. He got you 16 points on this day. And with Josh Jacobs there, Josh Jacobs was wildly outperformed. He got 5 fantasy points on 14 rushes for 43 yards. So this was interesting because Josh Jacobs until now has been this bell cow who has gotten touch after touch. They've loaded him up. But now Emmanuel Wilson, who has been active in those games, is starting to eat into that workload to the tune of 12 carries, 50 yards, outproducing him. What are we paying for Emmanuel Wilson now? A lot of you can get him on the waivers. I mean, he's probably a guy who's sitting on the waivers unless you're in a really deep league and you've got some guys who are really aware. And if he's on a roster, what are you paying to get him? Let's go with Bobby to start that one off.
You would definitely have to at least start figuring out just, I wouldn't go higher than a second. I keep hating saying a second, but you can't go higher than that because it's Josh Jacobs. There's a lot of teams that are still going to sit there and see him as an RB3. He's really the RB3 there, but his yards per carry keep outproducing Josh Jacobs. The carries he gets, he's doing better than Josh Jacobs. So, I really watched him that Brazil game. I thought he did incredibly well in that Brazil game, and in a game that really Josh Jacobs didn't do well in. I didn't think Josh Jacobs played well in the Brazil game, and he played really well, and I thought, hey, this could be something here. And then week 2 happened, and then Josh Jacobs blew up. And then it's like, all right, maybe that was just a one-off game. But, now here we are week 3 again. And like you're saying, 12 carries, 50 yards versus 14 for 43. So he's doing better with the numbers. And that's not with the same price tag that Josh Jacobs have. Now, I would have to look back and see what his contract situation is. That might play a little bit of role into what I would be offering for him. I would need to look into what Josh Jacobs' contract is. And is there going to be an overlap or is there going to be a gap where I can sit there and imagine Emmanuel Wilson taking advantage?
One thing with Josh Jacobs, right, is that he did get a 4-year deal. I know that number. Now, here's the number, 48 million. Now, one of the things that we see here is the total amount guaranteed is $12.5 million, which essentially to me says, yeah, the team's potential out is after a year. To me, right there, with hearing that information, Zach, let's talk about that. let's say they move on from old Josh Jacobs. Okay, now we've got Emmanuel Wilson as an option. Let's say he does well this year, but you've also got Marshawn Lloyd at running back. Now, Zach, why don't you tell us about Marshawn Lloyd and what kind of threat you think he could be to Emmanuel Wilson's role here as this kind of shadow RB waiting in the wings to take over Jacobs?
I don't have much more to add on that. I didn't see much from Marshawn Lloyd in the scouting process that made me, go wow. But with the draft capital they spent, with the 88th pick, I am very worried that this Emmanuel Wilson thing is a bit of a fever dream that's just bought by Marshawn Lloyd being on IR right now. And when he comes back, it's going to get all muddy all over again. What you said about Josh Jacobs having a potential out after this year, that is exactly why I did not buy him anywhere. And, I think he'll have a great year in Green Bay, but he seems like a rental, especially with how that organization treats the running back position. I just do not trust them to give me a year after year RB1 role player.
I mean, we saw that with Aaron Jones, right? Aaron Jones was still highly productive, effective for them in their playoff run, and they just said, "No, see ya. We're good."
Yeah, Aaron Rodgers needs to throw to AJ Dillon. That's who we'll draft. They have a weird philosophy with running backs that makes me run away.
Hey man, their philosophy with quarterback definitely works. That is for sure. One guy that we got to talk about in this game is Titans quarterback, also Will Levis, who was 26 of 34, 260 yards, 2 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. He also had another turnover via the run game, and he only added 12 yards on 3 carries and then fumbled the football. So, Bobby, you've got Will Levis listed as one of your top sells. Now, here's my question. Who the hell is buying?
No, I honestly don't think there's any buyer, but why I'm having him as the top sell is this might be it. Like the window is probably passed already, but you are running out, the sand is running out of the hourglass to sell this guy right now because we've already seen Bryce Young's done. We're already seeing Anthony Richardson struggle. Like, I do think the leash is a lot looser on Anthony Richardson because we knew he was a project coming in, but I feel like that wasn't the same with Will Levis. A lot of Will Levis's stuff was pro ready, being at Kentucky and his performances there with them. But it's incredible watching just how it's melted down in these 3 weeks. Well, sorry, I wouldn't even say 3 weeks, 2.5 weeks, because the first half he looked great. He looked great in the first half, and it's just ever since that second half, he has crumbled, and it's a complete head game. And I've seen what happens with quarterbacks when they spiral and they get this head game. It's like they can't get out. I don't know what it is, but they can never get out.
Will Levis has always kind of had this weird thing around him. I can tell you as somebody that's followed the Titans closely. And by the way, if you want to hear some truly unique insight, head on to the Dynasty Fantasy Football Show if you want to know about the Tennessee Titans, because no one else talks about the Titans except for me. So anyway, Titans fans, there are dozens of us. So yeah, Will Levis, the thing with Will Levis coming into this year is just there's always been this personality thing with him. Even coming into the league, I thought it was kind of interesting watching in the pre-draft process, right? There's this big meeting and it's Anthony Richardson and it's CJ Stroud and it's all these guys and they're sitting around asking Peyton Manning and Eli Manning all of these questions. And it's you're standing in front of Peyton and Eli, right? And what do you ask them? You ask them about marketing yourself on social media and becoming an influencer, And Peyton's response was literally just hey man, why don't you think about winning football games first? And then you can worry about all the commercials and stuff that you're going to get. It's where's your head at? Right. And well, when you can literally ask yourself that question when you watch him play football, where is your head at, brother? Because he is making some of the most mind-boggling plays that I have ever seen as a football fan. Not just like, oh man, as a Titans fan, I've seen some quarterbacks, come and go. No, these are some of the most Looney Tunes turnovers I've ever seen as a football fan watching football. So, I think that Will Levis is on extremely, extremely shaky ground as a player. He basically has to play for his career over the next 3 weeks or it's over. That's it. And so I completely agree with you. Now, one of the things that I'm going to say, though, is as a result, as a fantasy player, get out of every Titans asset that you possibly can, because that team is a sinking ship that is leaking water and it is going down fast. Brian Callahan is a first-year head coach. He has no idea how to reverse this. And it is looking really rough. It looks like the team is going to turn to Mason Rudolph and completely reboot next season. I'm not sure if Callahan even survives this year the way things are going. So just keep an eye out for major, major changes in Tennessee. Now, Zack had, to piggyback off of that, another guy listed as a guy you want to sell, and that is Titans wide receiver DeAndre Hopkins, who he gave the game ball to. So, Zack, tell us, with Hopkins' age, how can you actually make the case that somebody should buy DeAndre Hopkins, especially when Will Levis is playing this horribly?
Oh, you are finding the owner who is one wide receiver away from locking it in. Say he's 3-0 right now, but his wide receiver 3 is Tyler Lockett or something. You might be able to, grab a second or a third off of him to fill out his roster for the year. And like I said, take some easy money. DeAndre Hopkins' value was not there last year. Maybe you could see him do a couple big games, and you can hit this last window to get something for him. I gave him the game ball because he was the only thing that Will Levis could hang his hat on and move the offense with. So
I was going to say one of the first calls that I would be making is to a guy from our next game that we are going to cover, which is the Carolina Panthers 36-22 victory over the Las Vegas Raiders. They won with quarterback Andy Dalton at the helm, and Dalton excelled, giving you 25 fantasy points on 37 attempts. He completed 26 of those for 319 yards and 3 touchdowns, becoming the only quarterback in the league to have the distinction of throwing for 300 yards and 3 touchdowns so far in the NFL. Gotta love that. The Red Rifle is back. And he supported this wide receiver, who you might want to call if up the owner for, and that is wide receiver Deontay Johnson, who got 26 fantasy points on his 8 catches on 14 targets, 122 yards, and that touchdown that he scored, that 14 targets from Dalton, is looking like the Deontay Johnson we all thought we were going to get from Bryce Young. So, Zack, you've been a guy who's been kind of on this Deontay Johnson story. Tell us what you think of him right now, how you're valuing him moving forward. Do you think he's a guy that you want long-term or this season? Do you want to get out from him now? What's the play?
Yeah, he was a value in kind of best ball drafts, redraft. Everyone's kind of leaving the Panthers offense for dead, and we know Deontay Johnson can be a high volume guy, even in a bad offense. So going into it, he seemed like a really nice value at the wide receiver 3. Then Bryce Young kind of tanked that and made everyone scatter. Andy Dalton has completely resurrected this team for fantasy conversations, which is why we're talking about Deontay now. I think you can expect more of the same moving forward. I think he's going to do kind of what he did in Pittsburgh and just be a reliable volume guy that can pop off like he did this week. Do I think it's going to continue beyond this year? No way. I would definitely put him in the hit the sell window while it's here. I'm not going to bank on the Panthers in general staying a good offense, even with Andy Dalton moving forward. So, like I said, sell the uncertainty, take home the cold hard cash.
There's another player who you might want to do that with, and that is running back Chuba Hubbard. Now, Bobby, I'm going to have you to kind of talk about Chuba because he's been a guy that you and I have kind of always like somehow kept bringing back. Like he'll have these like weird breakouts and then he'll fall off the map and then he'll get his opportunity again. And every time he does it, he's like, and gets all of these carries, he's really good. Right. And then it's like, and then he goes away. And then you can't depend on Chuba Hubbard anymore. And then you have to like sell him and then buy him back. And it's like this whole thing. So here's the question. Is Chuba Hubbard here to stay this time? Or are you just like, he got 27 points this week, 114 yards, 55 yards receiving and a touchdown. Like this is like just a fluke game for him. Like, let's just sell and move on. Yeah, fluke?
It's an absolute fluke because the whole situation is like I wouldn't even do anything with this because Miles Sanders is still there. Miles Sanders can do enough. So Miles Sanders could pop off randomly one week and sooner or later Jonathan Brooks is coming. And then they're both going to be gone. So, well, at least we would hope as owners of Jonathan Brooks who spent high draft picks on him that these guys would go away. So like, if he shows up again, cool, but I'm not investing anything in him long term.
Right. I mean, that's the reason why I kind of like mentioned that, not like, oh my God, go buy Chuba Hubbard now because we saw this big breakout. It's because we've seen this before. We've seen Chuba Hubbard come out and have these big days. He was a great running back in college. He had a lot of talent. And coming into Carolina, I really thought there was a chance that this guy actually could be massive for them. And when, like I said, he's gotten his opportunities, he's been good. But that team has never committed to him, ever. Not over how many regime changes they've had. And it's just nobody seems to want Chuba Hubbard as the guy. And I'm not sure why that is, but we've always seen this team make every attempt to replace him instead of giving him the keys and letting him lead that backfield. So I think Chuba Hubbard, as you said, is a guy to stay away from. You've also listed Jonathan Mingo as a sell here. Now, this comes back to the who on earth is going to give you anything for Jonathan Mingo?
No, you're selling on hopium of like, oh yeah, Chuba Hubbard popped off, so could Jonathan Mingo. Me as the owner of him, it's just I'm running out of patience on him. He had a complete dud of a rookie season. We're now at 3 weeks into a sophomore season with more duds. So, that's what's really just like, if anybody wants him, come have him. I will listen to offers, but like he's starting to be one of those guys where if someone's on the waivers that I really see a lot of future potential in, he's a guy I need to really start considering, like, dropping that first, like, yes, he had a first-round pick attached to him, but listen, I'm not going to get that pick value back anymore. I got to just cut my dead weight and pick someone else that's got value down the road.
Okay, well, speaking of patience, we are going to talk about some assets in this one that some people have to have some patience with. And that is going to be the Seattle Seahawks victory over the Miami Dolphins. The Seahawks win big 24-3. We saw really tough days from a lot of the Miami guys. And we saw some really big days from some Seattle assets like Zack Charbonnet, who we were talking about last week. I don't know about Charbonnet, but he redeemed himself well with a 25-point day today. We also saw wide receiver DK Metcalf get big work. He got 20 points. And we saw JSN go right back to the shitter with his game 3 of 3 for 39 yards. It was brutal, man. Like, I don't know what to do anymore. Like, I'm dying, dude.
Jackson shit and Jigba?
Yeah. What do you think that stood for this whole time?
I didn't mean it, JSN. I love you.
No, man. It's it's been a rough time with JSN. Like I'm like laughing, crying as the fantasy owner because I'm just like, my God. And then we also have this guy we're going to talk about, which is like Noah Fant. We're going to have a little convo about him. But so we're going to go through like the buys and sells from this game. We're laughing because it's just like pre-production and Noah Fant, like the convo we were having around him. So we're going to have that on the air. But like, all right, buy or sell. First of all, JSN, are you buying or are you selling?
No, I'm not buying. Next.
I have him, and please come. Just give me anything of remote value for him, and please, I'm begging you. All right, Zach, what do you think? JSN, are you holding, are you selling, or buying, or what?
Oh, I would love to buy low to the people who are done. I would love to. I think it's only better days ahead. I'm not going to count his first year at all. They didn't know how to use him. We went over this last week, and now he's starting to get integrated. Tyler Lockett is still in his way. I think once we move forward and it's just the Metcalf and JSN show, we're gonna forget we were worried about him.
Zach sounds like a degenerate gambler right now. It's just like denying. He's denying facts.
Listen, man, you're making the hopium case for JSN. I hear it, but I'm running out of hopium, dude. Like we are low on patience for him. All right, DK. Like now, there are people like Zach. You said it best. He's kind of a controversial prospect for whatever reason, right? Some people just really are kind of like tentative on DK, but he's still producing. Even with Geno, even with Russell Wilson not necessarily being his best, like DK is still giving us these great weeks. So the question is he a buy or sell based on like what he's doing now for you guys? Like for me, he's a buy, but Bobby, what do you think?
It's so hard with all the stuff going on with Geno there. Like it's hard for me to believe in Geno. That comes the situation. Like Geno is part of the situation with JSN. DK has these up and down games. There's these games he takes off, and there's these games he doesn't show up. And for me, that's one of those things I always hate in a fantasy player. I hate not being able to rely on them, because then what it starts turning into head games with myself when I'm setting up lineups weeks down the road, where it's like, can I trust DK in this game? Can I trust this person in this game? So
Bobby making a great argument for playing best ball right there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But that's where I'm at. That's where I'm at with DK. It's not like I wouldn't necessarily, I'm not too high on him.
And Zach, lastly, is DK a buy or sell for you?
He's a hold. That's it. I wouldn't make a move for him. I wouldn't get rid of him. The reason is it's too cluttered right now. With Metcalf, JSN, Lockett, and yes, now Noah Fant. I just week to week, I am not thinking he's not going to be a Neighbors. He's not going to be a Chase. He's not going to be a JJ. So I see him more maybe in, I think your super upside case is like a Mike Evans type who will give you week winning production sometimes and then disappear other times just because of the way he plays and how he's like somewhere between a deep threat and a physical alpha. It's just not going to be consistent. So I'll buy him in best ball. I'll hold him everywhere else. His price is going to be too high for you to acquire him and then rely on him. The price he's going to command is like, oh, this guy is slotting in and I don't have to worry. You do have to worry with DK.
All right, man. Well, you mentioned this guy, so I got to talk about him. And I got to give everybody a little bit of backstory, okay? I was the guy who was like the biggest Noah Fant fan going into like his rookie draft that you could possibly have met. I was like watching his tape being like, bro, this guy, look at him. He looks like the best athlete on the field. He just looks like a man against boys. Like, I'm drafting him over TJ Hawkinson. I'm drafting him over AJ Brown. I'm drafting him over everybody, dog. Noah Fant's gonna smash. And my God, did he not do that? He definitely could, as a Denver Bronco, get you these weeks sometimes where you're like, I see it. It's there. He's becoming the tight end of the future. I'm so happy. Yes. And then he just goes right back. He does the JSN thing where it's like the hope shows up and you're like, oh, there it is. And then it goes away just as soon as it arrived because he's Noah Fant. And that is what he will do to you every single week that you own him. So to me, I am not buying Noah Fant. I'm selling him if I have him on my roster for a 3rd round pick, maybe a ham sandwich. I don't know. Zach, you think he's a buy. Why don't you give us the case?
Well, the first case is the last thing you said. It's because he's dirt cheap right now. And really, what would you, how much does a ham sandwich really cost you? Just grab him. He just got 6 for 60. If you're in tight end premium in this barren teenage tight end wasteland, that's valuable. But what you're really asking is what's the case for Noah Fant in general? And let me give it to you. In Denver, who was his quarterback? Teddy Bridgewater, Drew Lock. Name one fantasy player that either of those quarterbacks have supported. I can't. So he leaves the Broncos and he goes to Seattle. And what does he get? He gets a 3-way tight end committee with Will Disley and Colby, and he just doesn't get the role.
He also gets Drew Lock.
And he gets Drew Lock. So this is the first time Noah Fant is being paired with a quarterback who has ever done anything for anyone in fantasy. And it is the first time he has the uncontested starting role. So if you can get him for cheap, grab him. You can't lose.
So essentially what you're saying, if I'm hearing you right, is that even though Geno was the quarterback for Seattle over these past couple years and Noah Fant's also been there, this is really the first time we're seeing Noah Fant be unchallenged in the pecking order of tight ends.
Grubb has anointed him. He hasn't gotten that yet. And this is the first time. And Grubb is a way better coordinator, right? Than
I can see
Shane Waldron. So yeah.
Dude, here's the painful thing, right? Is I feel like my heart feeling this flicker of hope, the hopium coming back slowly.
Well, sell them to
body.
me first. Sell them to me first, and then let it happen.
To wrap up Zach's point, Noah Fant is available in 68% of sleeper leagues. So that tells you right there on majority of leagues, he's just waiver wire. So ham sandwich.
Right. I mean, yes, there is the case to go get Noah Fant for a ham sandwich, but I'm just telling you, if you expect that to be much more than a ham sandwich, you may find yourself feeling a little bit burned, as I have by Noah Fant. Okay. Now, how about Zach Charbonnet on this one? Because, we saw a huge game from him this week. Bobby, what are you thinking on Charbo? Are you thinking he's a buy or sell?
I think he's definitely someone you can look at buying right now. My main thing is just because of the injury to Kenneth Walker. It's an oblique, and any kind of soft tissue injury on a running back, I do not like. I do not like at all. So you have to factor in his youth mixed with that injury. Even if Kenneth Walker comes back, he could be limited on touches because of a soft tissue injury, so they're not trying to re-aggravate it. And he could possibly snake it, but the price has to be right. I would not overpay on Zach Charbonnet, but I could definitely take advantage of an owner who will just part with anything for Zack Charbonnet.
Now, here's another one that I saw on this kind of buy or sell conversation list that I thought was super interesting, which is Tyreek Hill. Now, we came into this season looking at Tyreek Hill as this guy who in redraft you'd be drafting almost possibly number 1 overall in your draft. Everybody who is looking at him as their wide receiver one in their lineups. Maybe not their dynasty wide receiver one, but definitely the guy that they're counting on for that production like now, right? So to see him on the sell list right now is kind of interesting, especially after the injury to Thompson. The question is maybe is Tyreek Hill like time to buy the dip, or is this just nope, he's old, sell now? What are we thinking there?
This is 100% a dynasty play. He's 30 years old. We don't know when Tua's coming back. We don't know how long Tua's going to come back. So you really have to start looking at this season as like a season you're not going to get to all of Tyreek Hill for. And that's if Tyreek stays healthy. Like, you have to put that in the mindset as well. So like you're getting like 6.6 from him. You're not getting a lot from him in these leagues. And it's only going to get worse if these quarterbacks keep going down and not playing and not finding a way to get them to the ball. So you have to ask yourself, as a Tyreek Hill owner, where are you sitting right now competitiveness? Like, is this a win now where, hey, do you need to fill his hole right now and you might trade him to someone that'll buy low on him to get someone to win now? Are you going to hold on to him to be something as a win now? Or that's where you have to figure out where you're at with Tyreek Hill. For me, I moved on from him about 3 years ago. I did start this season going, maybe I sold him about 3 years too early. And what we've had in the last 2 weeks this is why I sold him.
Okay, now we're going to get out of the buys and the sells of the Miami and Seattle game, and we are going to start talking a little bit of Lions and Cardinals. The Lions defeat the Cardinals 20-13. Although the Cardinals were the losers in this game, don't worry, you still got your smash game from Marvin Harrison Jr. He was just fine. Kyler Murray, maybe not quite as dominant as he was last week. But one of the things that we have to talk about is Sam Laporta was injured in this game, possible to miss week 4. And before that, he wasn't very good. He got 2 of 2 receptions for 36 yards, 5 points, PPR. I mean, it's been brutal with Laporta this year. I mean, there's no getting around it. If you had him, you were looking at him as the dynasty tight end 1 going into this season, and you were looking at it like, I've got this guy at tight end who is going to get me 20 points weekly. It's almost like us George Kittle owners a few years ago, right? Where it's like, oh my God, we've got George Kittle. He's going to absolutely smash. He's breaking tight end receiving records. And then all of a sudden the next year, it's like, dude, where's Kittle and what is going on? And now it's, where's Laporta and what is going on? This is some really concerning usage. So we're going to talk about Laporta a lot here and kind of in this tight end world. How do we value him? How are we handling this dip? Are we trying to buy, or are we thinking this is the real Sam Laporta and last year was just a fluke? All right, let's start with Zack on that one.
You're struggling with him, but it's only been 2 to 3 weeks. I'm not going to completely hit the panic button. The injury is rough. It means you're in a holding pattern. If you sell now, you're just giving it away. You need him to recover, have a big game or 2, and then you can sell. That's the unfortunate reality. The Lions offense has become a authentic, prolific offense where week to week there's so many weapons that you're not sure who's going to pop off and who's going to kind of take the week off and be the odd man out. So because the offense is so good, because he's proven it with the talent, I'm not out on him in Dynasty. You're just going to have to weather the storm.
Absolutely. I almost view him as more of like a guy that I'm holding personally, but I also want to hear Bobby's take. Bobby, what do you think of Sam Laporta and how to deal with him? Are you hitting the panic button on him?
No, because everything you've been saying about tight ends, it's been a broken record. It is, hey, insert tight end name here, has been really rough, and they're not really doing well in this poor performance because we're as we keep saying in this tight end wasteland, it has been bad. There's a lot of people on here right now that are bad. So for me, as it was like, if I was trying to get rid of Laporta, it would be like, all right, cool. Who? Like, who am I going to get? Because no one else is producing right now. Like we said earlier on, like Cole Kmet, something like that. If my team is whipping everybody's ass, but I got Sam Laporta and he's holding me back, then yeah, that's where you go and try to go off for a Cole Kmet. But I'm also in a situation where like, hey, my team's dominating. I can wait and see with Sam Laporta. So again, I'm holding back on just like, we need to see some of these tight ends just kind of, it almost seems like the league itself is like, we're not letting these tight ends, it's like they've figured out how to defend tight ends now, and now the league has to correct itself.
Who was it that played Goddard this week?
Saints.
The Saints. They may have they may have lost the playbook on defending tight ends on the way to the game, or something like that. It was some trouble. Okay.
Well, the Bears as well
now,
for Cole Kmet.
Right. Okay, now Zack, here's a case I want to hear, right? You have your top buy right now listed as Trey Benson. Trey Benson has been pretty much awful so far in the times he's been on the field. So why are you pointing him out as somebody that you're still in on, given that every time he gets there, nothing really happens? It's kind of like a Najee Harris almost.
I think that's driving his price down. This is kind of in reaction to James Conner's horrible day. He had 3 fantasy points, 9 carries for 17 yards, and 1 catch for 8 yards. So that's 18 up. What is that? 10 opportunities for not even 30 yards. Not even, and that's like, this is James Conner. They're trying to make him work. So if James Conner is looking like a guy they might not be able to just automatically trust week in and week out, and they have this running back who is a highly touted prospect coming in, sitting right there, I feel like he's going to get more opportunities. He's a rookie. Let's give him some grace to figure the game out and learn how to run around, NFL pro defensive linemen rather than architect majors. Buy him low while he's cheap.
All righty. Now here's another way we want to handle running backs, which is kind of trying to figure out this Jahmyr Gibbs, David Montgomery thing, right? Because Jahmyr, he's producing still. He got you 16 fantasy points. And as well, David Montgomery got you 21. So it's like we can get double production out of both of these backs, right? Like, this offense is capable of supporting an RB1 and RB2. But one thing I did want to ask is, given some of the usage that we're seeing from Jahmyr and how like David Montgomery is getting these big workloads, is Jahmyr Gibbs perhaps a sell due to probably kind of how the name value outpaces his touches, right? As opposed to like his production. His production is good, but his touch count is low. Is he a guy that maybe you're trying to get out of due to the touches and the possible kind of bottom out weeks?
No, I agree. I think it's that situation. You can sell on name, and his production's good enough with name, and his production can get you a decent value. As for like for instance, like I feel like a Gibbs I could sell for a first plus, where that same production from a David Montgomery, it's like, hey, like a second might be all I have to pay for, or a second, or maybe even like, hey, just a player swap could be all I need to do to get David Montgomery. As for like, okay, but Jahmyr Gibbs is younger, he's at an upside. Yeah, but when David Montgomery's gone, who doesn't say that they're going to draft another guy? And then it's, well, now he's the old guy in the room, and now here's the young guy, and now you've lost all your value you had with him being the young guy is now all gone. So that's where I'm kind of sitting with Jahmyr Gibbs, is like, hey, if you're really sold on him. Congrats, keep on it. But like, I think you could really still sell pretty decently high on him right now. And I mean, like, you start looking at what some of those Bijan offers are, because I feel like that's where he's at. Like, he could get. I mean, right now he's producing more than Bijan. So go look at see what some of those values are, because the difference is while Bijan is producing those numbers and nobody else in the backfield, David Montgomery is doing the exact same, and he's not going to have that price tag attached to him.
Now, Zach, you mentioned David Montgomery as a guy that you were probably looking to sell after a week like this, where he was massive and he kind of garnered more of like the carry share. Why do you think, versus like what Bobby's saying, which is the case that Jahmyr Gibbs is probably the guy you probably want to try to cash in on now? David Montgomery looks to be that for you. Why is that?
I have the opposite view as far as Gibbs's trajectory. I think Gibbs is weathering the storm that is David Montgomery, and David Montgomery has an out after this year on his contract. So I like that Gibbs is attached to the Lions offense. I'm pretty much really into anyone who's on this offense. I think they are here to stay. And I don't think David Montgomery is. I'm really not worried about the next back they bring in to pair with Gibbs just because they spent, was it a top 10 pick on this guy? Pick 11? Gibbs was one of those overdrafted running backs that they really wanted to make a focal point of the backfield. So I think Gibbs had kind of a low week this week because he didn't have any receptions, but this is PPR. And I think even if he has less volume, I think his fantasy points per touch is going to be very, very high. And he's going to be a dynasty RB1 this year. And when Montgomery goes out the door, his value is going to skyrocket. So if you have a sell window for Gibbs, I'd say let the season play out. And if you're worried about the draft, sell him right before that.
All right. Speaking of running back contracts, we saw Justice Hill from the Baltimore Ravens get a little nice extension and payday from the team for some of his work, kind of as the passing down back. However, we have seen that the volume of work is going to running back Derrick Henry, King Henry, 30 points PPR this week, although not much of it came in the pass game. A lot of that damage was done with the volume in the rush game. 25 rushes, 151 yards, 2 touchdowns. Look, as the guy who can talk about the Tennessee Titans, that is vintage Derrick Henry right there. That is what that guy can do for your fantasy football team. However, the guy is aging. So the thing that we want to talk about is whether or not Derrick Henry can be, beyond this season, a running back one for the Baltimore Ravens. Do we think that he is going to A, be there next year, or B, be able to continue this kind of thing? Because I think that really affects how you value Derrick Henry. Because if he's going to continue to be this guy in Baltimore, don't we think that like he is going to be a guy that can be massive for us in fantasy? Zach, why don't we start with you making that case for Derrick Henry, whether or not you should be, I don't want to say buying necessarily because the price to get him as the contender is high, but maybe holding or maybe not selling if you're in that window.
If I have Derrick Henry, I'm selling in Dynasty. That's just pretty much how I play. I would have to be, like I said, it would have to be a very binary situation where with him, I'm looking really good to contend, and without him, I'm definitely not. That would be the only thing that gave me pause. But where the wheels are going to fall off with Derrick Henry, we've been doomsaying it for years. Father Time is undefeated. At a certain point, you have an aging asset. There's only so long before the value just goes completely to the floor and you're left holding the bag. So anytime I have a 30-year-old like DeAndre Hopkins or Derrick Henry have a big day, I'm gonna shake the tires on getting rid of them. The Ravens, will run it down your throats if you can't stop it. Lamar had 12 total attempts, and this is a 28-point victory over Dallas. So this was not, some, you know, game that was well in hand and they were just handing it off because who cares what happens. They
That's
saw
right.
that it
It's
was
like
working.
that's the game plan,
Yeah.
is to attack you on the ground, right? So with that in mind, Bobby, is Derrick Henry somebody that you are buying, or are you still kind of like, no, I'm either holding or selling?
Yeah, so I'm currently the owner of Derrick Henry in the league that I commish. I I've been holding on to him. I've been trying to sell him for, I would say, probably about 2 years now. I've had a very like firm first. Like, I know he's old, but it's a first because he's Derrick Henry. Um, those offers would probably still be out there. My selling point, for people that are sitting there thinking, yeah, you're buying him, but for how long? Listen to this next gen stat. 12 Derrick Henry forced 12 missed tackles on Sunday, the second most of any player in a game this season. This was the infamous hip drop tackle ban game. This is the game we knew was coming, of when you can't hip drop tackle Derrick Henry, this is going to happen. And this was finally that game. He still looks good. He still has top end speed to get away from people. That's where, if I was a Derrick Henry owner, if I start seeing him he's not breaking away anymore. Oh, he's breaking through, but he's not breaking away. The runs that were 50, 60, 70 yards and are now 20, 30-yard runs. He's still ripping them, but he's not sending them to the house. If that was going on, I would be like, all right, this is it. He could still go for another 2 years. He still could go for another 3 years. Father Time is going to catch up, but like, we said the same thing about Tom Brady, of like, he's turning 40. He's gonna have to end it at some point. He went on for another 5 years. So you can have a good selling argument. Throw some of those stats in there. Throw that. You can sell him for a first. The production's there with the running backs going on right now. He has the performance to get that value. But it's depending on, are you going to give in and sell for less because you're just desperate, or are you a contender where it's like, or a competitive team where it's like, no, I can hold firm on what it's going to take to get rid of him off my team.
I think it kind of comes down to what Zack said, which is like, it all depends on your roster makeup and how you are versus with Derrick Henry versus without him. And I will say this, if I am a contending team and I believe I'm a running back away, that's the guy I'm targeting right now. If I am not a contending team and I have Derrick Henry on my team doing things like that, I am trying to sell him to anybody and trying to get the maximum return that I can. And what's great for you if you're in that situation is Derrick Henry producing like this and giving you these kinds of weeks so that you can maximize that value. Now, here are a couple guys who are very low value from this game that you will want to be paying attention to. And one of those guys is wide receiver Jalen Tolbert, who got 13 PPR points. He was 3 of 5 for 42. He got in the end zone this week. And we mentioned him on the show last week. Hey, look at this guy. Look at the way he's playing out there. He's somebody you want to pay attention to. Well, he got some consistency. He now has back-to-back weeks, good production. That's somebody you want to look out. Another buy you want to look out from in this game is running back Rico Dowdle, who's 8 points PPR, was earned with 3 of 5 targets in the past game. He got 24 yards. He also had 8 rushes for 32 yards. So Rico starting to get in the mix. Look, one thing we know about that Dallas backfield is that it's awful. I mean, and because it is awful, there is a window where Rico Dowdle can come in there and kind of seize a role. So there is a little window right now for Rico. If he is cheap, go get him off your waivers. I wouldn't be trading anything for him. I'd be staying away from that Dallas backfield. And now we are going to move on into a game which features no question marks in the backfield, and that is the battle between the Los Angeles Rams and the San Francisco 49ers. The Rams come out 27-24, handing Kyle Shanahan the defeat. And in this game, we saw great performances from running back Kyron Williams, who had 31 points, 3 touchdowns, 24 carries, 89 yards, 2 touchdowns, added 2 receptions, 27 yards, and a touchdown. We had a little typo there, so it said he had 27 touchdowns. He definitely did not. Yes. Now, this is the guy who felt like he had 27 touchdowns this week, and that was wide receiver Jawan Jennings, who's 46 points. Say it with me, people. Jawan Jennings, 46 PPR points, 11 of 12, 175 yards, 3 touchdowns. He absolutely smashed. So how does this game change Jawan Jennings' dynasty valuation for everyone here? We'll start with Bobby.
You have to see it again. It's an amazing performance, but you have to see it's no Debo, it's no Kittle, it's no CMC. In my opinion, another shocker is also that this performance wasn't Ayuk. So I think part of it might have been a little bit of like, hey, they only have Ayuk. We're just gonna bracket him, and this is how this happened. This definitely seems like an injuries doubling Ayuk. This is how this happened. We're gonna let you beat us with Jawan Jennings. And they tried to beat them with Jawan Jennings. They got close, but it didn't happen. So, like, maybe you if you've got, like, you're banged up or something like that, and you've got a roster spot to stash him and play the wild card of can this happen again and again and again? Sure, but I wouldn't put any assets into this.
Okay, now I'm going to set up a scenario, and I'm going to have Zach respond to this one because he kind of has been the staunch defender of the honor of one Ricky Pearsall. And so here's the scenario that I'm worried about. If I'm the guy who has Ricky Pearsall, now, full disclosure, I traded him after I found out about the shooting. I was just like, I don't know about this, man. So Jawan Jennings having this kind of day with Ayuk in the game, without Kittle, without CMC, granted. But the thing that this really signals a big concern for me is Ricky Pearsall's standing, because Jawan Jennings got a contract over this offseason. That's something that I think a lot of people overlook, is the fact that the team actually made a point to re-up Jawan Jennings, even though they went out and spent, the first rounder on Ricky over the offseason and everything. So the question basically is with a performance like this, how the heck do you think Ricky Pearsall is going to get this guy's job?
Well, I'd say yes, Juwan did get the contract, and the reason is for this situation, right? Because Shanahan knows that he can rely on him. I don't know if he knew he could rely on him like this, but he was a guy that if they're experiencing some injuries in San Francisco, which has happened once or twice to them, they wanted to make sure they were covered. Now, the contract, it's not even $3 million this year. It's not even $4 million next year, and then it's over. So I'm not really seeing a huge investment that makes them prioritize him over Ricky Pearsall. So I'm selling Jawan Jennings, right? I mean, obviously all these targets are going to come back, and he's, his relevancy is going to come into question. And as far as Ricky goes, you already thought this was a wasted year for him. I mean, he was coming into a crowded room. Debo, Kittle, CMC, and he's coming in on the pup. You pretty much expected that this year was going to be a lost year where you were just hoping to see some flashes, and then you wanted to see what the roster looked like next year. So I'm not really worried about Ricky. If anything, Jawan Jennings may have increased his trade value. But yeah, I think this is just a flash in the pan week. He could continue while people are out, but I think he's going to taper off, and Ricky's going to get worked in when he can. and things will come out in the wash come 2025.
Now, one guy that I think that we kind of had mentioned was Brandon Ayuk. Now, one thing to also note is that Ayuk did get a very similar number of targets. He got 10 targets, but he only got 5 receptions for 48 yards and was kind of like a non-factor. Are we really worried about Brandon Ayuk long term in like weekly formats, like where you're kind of having to figure out whether or not you should start him? Is he kind of falling out of the conversation of being startable?
No, I think Bobby had it. It was just the LA Rams defense had no one else to key in on, so they took him away. They're not going to be able to do that. No one's going to be able to do that to the 49ers when they're actually healthy.
Yeah, I think if anything, what you can look at it as there's been a lot of discussion around Chris Godwin like this of like, oh, he's a wide receiver one playing wide receiver two. I felt like this could have been a game where you could have really maybe seen, hey, is Brandon Ayuk really a wide receiver one? Could he ever elevate to that? I think this was a game that maybe you sat there. It's like, no, he's a wide receiver two that he's great at that role. So he's never going to be a world killer.
So, I mean, he has given you those world killing weeks, but any wide receiver two on any given week, like in a great game, can give you a world killing week. So speaking of some receivers that you might want to pick up, just on the off chance that, maybe you get a world killing week out of them, it would be these guys in the LA Rams, right? The LA Rams receiving room right now is barren because Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua are out. So the question is while they are out, who the heck is the wide receiver that you want to be buying in this offense? Bobby, I will have you go first. Who are you looking at as the buy right now?
Well, originally I was leaning Tyler Johnson, just a little bit of that knowledge of the Bucks, and then also his performance in Week 1. But after this week, it could possibly be Tutu Atwell. I mean, 74% snap percentages, caught 4 of his 5 targets, 93 yards. But the number one reason I'm looking at it, 52% rostered on Sleeper right now. So he's going to be a free asset in nearly half your leagues. So you don't have to trade for anything or invest draft capital or anything like that. You can just waiver him. So that would be a guy that like I would look at as an addition if these injuries are going to be for long term.
Okay, now here's a guy that I'm gonna also come in on with you on this one is wide receiver Jordan Whittington from the Los Angeles Rams. The reason I'm talking about Whittington maybe over Atwell, even though Atwell is probably going to give you more production right now, is that if you're thinking about it from the perspective of Dynasty, I think that this is a really nice window for Jordan Whittington, who is a rookie, to possibly kind of get himself into the mix and buy himself a role on the team moving forward. This is almost the scenario that I envisioned for Puka Nacua last year when I was kind of trying to figure out, hey, Bobby, should we draft Puka Nacua? It was kind of like, well, he's young, he's, a late round draft pick, all this stuff. But the fact is that, there's an open receiver room. There's opportunity for this young guy to kind of get in there and make a name for himself, right? And I think that Whittington is a dirt cheap ad right now. This is a guy that you can basically go out and get for free in your dynasty leagues that has some dynasty value. Whereas I don't know that Tutu Atwell or like Demarcus Robinson or Tyler Johnson or these guys that, have some more NFL experience, but aren't necessarily like doing as much with that as where Jordan Whittington is. You have that upside of the unknown, right? Like, yeah, he's not getting in the mix right now, but like we know what Demarcus Robinson is in the NFL. We know what Tutu Atwell is in the NFL. We know what these guys do. So Whittington would be my guy. Zack, who is your receiver in this Rams offense that you are trying to get while these injuries are happening before we move on to our final game of the week?
I think I'm with you there with Jordan Whittington. I'm not too interested in chasing the wide receiver 3 role in LA. Van Jefferson kind of had me in and out for a few years, and I'm just kind of thinking it's going to be a carousel. It's going to be Cooper Kupp, Puka, and then I think the wide receiver three is going to be very role and matchup dependent week to week. But I do agree that Jordan Whittington is probably the only one there that has a trajectory to change that.
Let me make a small case for maybe Whittington when you're talking about Cooper and Puka. And this is kind of really the case for Puka being as high of a wide receiver like asset as he was going into this year, right? We saw his ADP really climb into the stratosphere. And so the question is basically, do we not see kind of possibly like a Cooper Kupp exit maybe coming into play here because of all the injuries? They haven't been able to rely on him. Do you think that maybe Cooper Kupp starts, kind of getting out the door a little bit here?
It's possible. Even in general, just seeing his age creep up there, he's starting to hit that veteran sell window. So there is room for guys to come in. I think when the Rams start facing that eventuality, they're going to bring in someone else.
Right on. Okay, that's a good thought there. All right, now we are going to close out our show with some Sunday night football before we log off to go watch Monday night football. That is the Kansas City Chiefs Sunday night win. They defeat the Atlanta Falcons 22-17. We had a couple key injuries in this game, notably along Atlanta's offensive line. They lost 2 offensive linemen in this game. That is going to be a little bit of a concern for them moving forward, protecting an immobile quarterback like Kirk Cousins, and as well as making rushing room for Bijan Robinson. We are going to talk about a lot of guys in this game through the buy or sell lens. So we're going to go down the list of players in this that were featured in this game. We're going to play the buy and sell game to close us out here. Okay, so our first buy or sell, Rashee Rice. Now, good luck buying him, but if there's an owner that's selling Rashee Rice, Bobby, are you buying him?
No, yes, I would be buying him if you're sitting there looking for a wide receiver, like it is hands down, he is the new Tyreek Hill in this offense. He is who they're targeting. He is who they're feeding. The more and more that we see that Travis Kelce is not involved in this offense anymore, maybe he shows up at some point, but this offense is now going through him. And that's where I'm sitting there thinking, well, if it's going through him and he's young, Patrick Mahomes is not going anywhere. Maybe Andy Reid sooner or later will go somewhere, but for the foreseeable future, Andy Reid's not going anywhere. Patrick Mahomes is not going anywhere. Rashee Rice is not going anywhere. So that's in Dynasty, that's something I always put a very big premium on. Now, again, if he goes back behind the car and goes crazy, then you have to worry about that. And you could probably knock down your value if you're trying to buy him. It's like, hey, listen, a suspension is coming. Hey, he's going to miss time. You could try to see about maybe knocking some value off of him, but the production is going to be there in the long term.
Now, one thing with Rashee is is he going to be suspended? Because I feel like if he was, we would have seen that already, but we haven't. We have not seen that happen.
I don't think he's going to be suspended. Yeah.
Yeah. If I'm the owner and you're trying to make that case to me, I'd probably call BS, to be honest. I would probably say, hey, I don't think that's going to happen. Now, one guy that we definitely have to talk about here on this thing is Travis Kelce. It is TE Wasteland. We do have to consider that, but it is also Dynasty, and he is aging, and he does look like he is still on the Eras Tour. So what exactly are we doing with Travis Kelce? Zack, is Travis Kelce a sell or a buy, or what are you doing with him?
It's too late, man. Much like, he's 34 now? We should have been selling him. He's going into mid-30s. He is a retirement risk every year, especially with Jason Kelce retired. I don't know if you can get anything for him now. I think you decided that you were going to hold this hot potato, and now you just have to deal with it. If you can get something for him, if you can
and
get
the
a
thing
second
is
for
if
him,
you could get something for him, would you, right? Because the upside that he presents to you
right,
through being tied to Patrick Mahomes being Travis Kelce, right? It's almost like you can't. He's one of those really tough players because it's like almost like like this. You get this feeling like I sell him for a second and then he's gonna have the 20-point week, right? Like
Yeah, he's one of those outlier guys. I'd put him in like the Christian McCaffrey, Travis Kelce, Derrick Henry, Cooper Kupp, where it's like, okay, he's getting up there, but the production is so elite that it's kind of like, give me a first, or I'll just play him until he retires. He can retire on my team in the Wall of Fame if all I'm gonna get is a second. So it's tough. I don't know if I'd probably cut my losses for a second at this point. I don't know if it's ever coming back, and if it does, is it going to come back next year? Right? Like the whole point is he's at least supposed to give you this year, and he's not giving it to you. If you sell him and he does, and then he retires, are you really going to be sad you got a second? No. So
And his production's horrible right now, but the other thing is week 1 he was tight end 13. This week he was tight end 14. Like, it's just another example of just, it's bad, but it's bad all across the board. So there's some people like maybe they want to trade, maybe, but then who do you replace them with? That's a lot of what these tight end problems right now is. You just got to hold because everybody's bad right now.
right. Okay, here was another guy that was kind of interesting. We saw rookie running back Carson Steele assume the running back 1 role for the Chiefs this week. He got you 8 points, which wasn't a lot, but he did that on 17 touches and he got 72 yards. He also was targeted twice and caught one of those balls for 2 yards. So Carson Steele, buy or sell Bobby?
No, not doing anything with Carson Steele. It was like, I think I was seeing when I was watching the game, they were discussing that Carson Steele was not supposed to play in this game. He was not planned to play in this game because he was like predetermined to go to a wedding. Like, this was a preseason, hey, week something, there's a wedding, I will not be here, find me a replacement. And then all these injuries happened, and it was pretty much like, JK, I guess I'm not going to this wedding anymore because I have to start Sunday Night Football. And then you see Chris Collinsworth and all of them cut into the wedding with a big TV in there with the family watching. Because, like, oh, I guess that was the only way to get him at this wedding. Like, and I mean, at least it's going to be a memory to remember for that family and for him. But it was also so goofy watching like goal line plays with him because they're trying to give him that like wedding touchdown to like have the family all cheering because he did it, and it just fell flat on his face, and none of those plays ever worked. So it's one of those things. It's reminding me a lot of Peyton Hillis. Like, okay, cool, this guy's here.
You're just saying that because he's white.
No, yes, white, but it's also just like overrated white running back.
All right. Now, one thing I did want to mention also on Carson Steele, and this is one of the reasons that, like, even though I'm like just giving Bobby a hard time, I actually kind of like totally agree with him, which is get out from Carson Steele while you can, because Clyde Edwards-Helaire is coming back next week. And also Kareem Hunt is still waiting in the wings on the practice squad and can be elevated into Carson Steele's role at basically any time. Another sell that we are going to get into, this is going to be such a fun one. We are going to give both of you guys an opportunity to answer this one, and I will have Bobby go first because he is the guy who drafted him 101 in one of his leagues, and that is Atlanta running back Bijan Robinson. Are you selling or buying, Bobby?
To be honest, I've already sold him because that's one of my new formulas is I draft a running back and then I just sell them the following year. But it's one of those things. This is what I was worried about a little bit. He had a great rookie season, but this is what I was worried about, of a lot of that hopium behind Arthur Smith's going away. And once Arthur Smith's gone, like, here comes 40 carries for Bijan Robinson, and it's all going to be hunky-dory. And I'm like, yeah, but what if that doesn't happen? What if his workload stays a little low or regresses, and then all that hype, all that value around him is gone, and now you're left with, you still could probably move him. I don't see a team that would not be trading for Bijan Robinson right now, but probably wouldn't be getting like the multiple firsts and stuff like that I got for him. So I would definitely, I'd be interested to see what people might be offering for him right now, because you did not spend multiple firsts to get one touchdown in 3 games. That's just unacceptable.
No, that's true. You definitely want more out of the production. Zach, do you think that production is coming? Are you buying Bijan or are you selling?
Yeah, if there's a Bijan owner who's kind of frustrated at this point that he hasn't turned into Christian McCaffrey yet, I'd love to just throw a first at him and steal him. Even a first and a second, I'd do it. I'm not ready. Like I said, when it comes to the Falcons offense, I'm deleting the last 2 years. I don't care what Desmond Ridder and Arthur Smith's Falcons offense usage was. It doesn't mean a thing to me. And so far, Bijan's getting the volume. We might have to weather the storm this year with those injuries to the O-line and Algier still kind of getting worked in and Zack Robinson still setting things up in town. There's maybe a little bit of shakeup at the quarterback position at some point. So changes are still kind of looming for this offense. I'm not ready to be out on him and then be wrong later. I'd still like to see, even if this year he doesn't become that, I'd still like to see year 3 before I'm cutting my losses. So
if you've made that major investment, I'd probably agree with you. But if you maybe didn't get him for such an inflated price, it might be time to just kind of take that name value and volume that he's getting and try to convert that into maybe bigger than what you paid, because the value may actually have increased somewhat over last year if you had somebody that saw the rookie year and thought it sucked. Now, speaking of guys on the Atlanta Falcons who are very frustrating, we're going to talk about Atlanta tight end Kyle Pitts, who we had a debate on our show about last week. And it seems like we will continue to debate about whether or not it is finally time to just give it up, man. It's never going to happen. Stop trying. It's like the Regina George, Mean Girls. Stop trying to make Kyle Pitts happen. It's never going to happen. So just stop it, right? Like, so Bobby, is Kyle Pitts going to happen, or is Fetch just going to kind of stay, on the sideline of our word usage?
I'm glad we're ending on Kyle Pitts in this tight end wasteland, because he was tight end 4 week 1 and he was tight end 7 week 3. So he's been a top 10 tight end for a majority of the season so far. And that again shows you how bad tight ends are when 2 catches for 50 something yards gets you tight end 7. Like, that shows you how bad it is right now. But hey, we're ending with a top tight end for the podcast. So yes.
Yes, a top tight end option for you. Certainly. You guys can keep thinking that one.
Hey.
And I will take the draft pick that you will send me, because you still believe that. All right, Zach.
Let's remember, the only reason you're taking a victory lap right now is because he was brought down 1 yard in front of the end zone yesterday.
Oh yeah, he'd probably be tight end 1 if he actually brought it in the end zone.
I was about to say,
I don't know about tight end 1. I don't think he's outscoring Goddard. But,
this would have been a real quiet. Never mind, I'm not going to mention Kyle Pitts if he had 1 extra yard yesterday on that catch. So I'm calling BS. Save your victory lap. Do it on your own. It ain't there yet.
He would have been tight end 4 if it went in the end zone. So he would have been tight end 4 in 2 of the 3 weeks this year.
Yeah, I should have you guys know I'm being totally facetious. Just, like I'm just voicing like the kind of, I guess you would say, like what we all feel, as the Kyle Pitts owners there.
It hurts.
It hurts.
It hurts.
It's a life
I traded for him and he's not started for me for like 2 years.
There you go. There you go. All right, y'all. So this has been another episode of the Dynasty Fantasy Football Show. We are going to head out and watch us some Monday Night Football. I still don't know why they do these double headers. It is absolutely terrible. ESPN, please stop what you are doing with this and find a new strategy. So, like, seriously, like, the idea is to get as many eyes on the game as possible, right? So why are we cutting?
We got lives, ESPN. Come on.
Okay. Anyway, that's been our show. If you like what you've heard, if you found the information useful, if you've been profiting off of Sam Darnold for 3 weeks because you're the smarty pants that listens to this show, please give us a like, subscribe, follow, because you are going to get more hot tips like signing the NFL MVP in week 1 off of your waiver wire right here on the Dynasty Fantasy Football Show. We'll see you next time, y'all.